rappers that are killers. Yeah, you heard that right. And no, I'm not talking about lyrics. See, here's the thing about the rap game. Most of these artists you listen to, they're lying to you, straight up. They hop on a beat, talk about bodies dropping, moving weight, running the streets, and they've never even been in a fist fight. It's an image, a costume they put on to sell records, because street credibility sells, always has. But then there's a small group of rappers who never had to lie. Everything they say in the booth, they lived it. And that's exactly why fans gravitate toward them, because in an industry full of actors, they're authentic. What you hear in the music is what actually happened in the streets, and you can feel the difference. Own life, and it wasn't just talk. Vaughn was actually charged with murder. The music and the police reports were telling the same story. And if he was alive today, he would most likely be in jail for life. So let's get into it. The warning signs nobody saw with King Von was sitting in plain sight the whole time. In police files, in FBI documents, in his own lyrics, and by the time the world finally read them, the man Chicago police had positively identified as a killer in at least 2 separate homicide investigations was already dead, gunned down outside an Atlanta hookah lounge at 26 years old. No cap, this is not a story about a rapper who got caught up in the streets. This is a story of how the streets built something far darker than a gangster, and how everybody watched it happen in real time without calling it what it was. Let me hit you with the numbers first, because the numbers don't lie even when everybody else does. 10, that's how many murders a viral documentary alleged King Von was involved in before he ever went platinum. 5 in 2012 alone, 3 more in 2014, another in 2018, and one final body in March of 2019, according to the doc's timeline. 2, that's how many separate homicide investigations where Chicago police documents actual paperwork, not internet rumors, named Davon Bennett as the offender who pulled the trigger, including the killing of Gakira K.I. Barnes, a 17-year-old who was herself rumored to be one of the most feared shooters in Chicago. 50,000. That's the dollar amount the FBI's own declassified files say a confidential informant claimed Vaughn initially put on the head of FBG Duck. A hit that eventually went down in broad daylight on Chicago's Gold Coast in August 2020, 3 months before Vaughn himself was killed. And 0, that's how many murder convictions King Von had when he died. 0. Every single case either fell apart, got rejected by prosecutors, or ended in acquittal. And the reasons why are some of the wildest parts of this whole story. Here's the part that's gonna sit with you. When a British YouTuber named Trap Lord Ross dropped a 4-hour documentary in April 2023 calling King Von Rap's first serial killer, the internet lost its mind. The video got yanked off YouTube in 48 hours after backlash from Von's family and fans. Then it came back, edited, and the debate exploded all over again because Ross wasn't just throwing a label around for clicks. He argued on Vlad TV and everywhere else that Von's alleged pattern fit the FBI's own definition of a serial killer. Multiple killings over time, but what Ross claimed was personal gratification behind them. He even pointed to a pattern he said he found Von allegedly tweeting shortly after murders he was suspected of committing, like a man leaving receipts on his own timeline. Now, was that label fair? His family said absolutely not. His day one said it was character assassination of a dead man who couldn't defend himself. Prosecutors never proved a single one of those bodies in court. But here's the question this whole video is really about. How does a kid go from watching his father get gunned down at 10 years old, to being the name inside multiple Chicago homicide files, to becoming one of the biggest rappers in the world, all in the span of 16 years without anybody stopping to read the signs? Because the signs were there. They were there when he caught his first armed robbery case at 16. They were there in April 2014 when witnesses put him at the scene of K.I.'s murder. They were there a month later when a college student named Malcolm Stuckey, an innocent bystander who came to a birthday party to eat and play basketball, ended up face down on the grass. They were there every time Von rapped the story so specific, so detailed, so cold that streets across Chicago whispered, "These ain't bars, these are confessions." And they were there in the grief because every time somebody Von loved got taken, people who knew him said something in him got darker. His father, his best friend T. Roy, killed on Valentine's Day 2017, while Vaughn sat in Cook County Jail unable to do anything but hear about it through the phone. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how the machine that built King Von worked, the block that raised him, the war that consumed him, the losses that hardened him, and the paper trail that followed him to his grave. This ain't about glorifying nothing, and it ain't about tearing down a dead man either. It's about laying out every warning sign in order with the receipts, police documents, court records, FBI files, witness statements, and letting you decide for yourself what King Von really was. Let me break it all the way down for you, but I'm telling you right now, some of this is going to be hard to hear. King Von wasn't just another drill rapper. By November 2020, Davon Daquan Bennett was arguably the best pure storyteller the genre had ever produced. Crazy Story and Took Her to the O both went triple platinum, and his debut album Welcome to O Block hit number 5 on the Billboard 200. Critics who written drill off as noise were comparing his narrative writing to street literature. He was signed to Lil Durk's Only the Family, co-signed by the biggest names in Chicago, and 1 week after that album dropped, he was dead. But here's what really went down beneath the music, and it's the reason this story hits different from every other rapper tragedy. Von's catalog wasn't fiction inspired by the streets. According to police documents, FBI files, and the most controversial hip-hop documentary ever made, a lot of it may have been autobiography. The same qualities that made his music undeniable, the detail, the specificity, the cold-blooded calm in his delivery, are the exact things investigators and researchers later held up as evidence that he'd lived every bar. The killing of King Von didn't just end a career, it cracked open a vault. Because once he was gone, the documents started coming out. FBI declassifications in January 2023 unearthed Chicago PD files, federal racketeering indictments against his own crew, and piece by piece the public got to see what law enforcement had allegedly known the whole time. To understand how a kid from Parkway Gardens ended up at the center of all of it, we gotta go back, way back. Before the fame, before the bodies, before the beef, back to a 10-year-old boy on 64th and King Drive, learning the hardest lesson the South Side teaches. Let's rewind to August 9th, 1994. Davon Daquan Bennett is born in Chicago, Illinois, into a family already stretched across 2 households. 6 half-siblings on his father's side, 3 siblings on his mother's. His mother, Tasha, raises him in the Parkway Garden homes on the 6,400 block of South Martin Luther King Drive, a housing complex the world would later know by a different name, O Block. His father, Walter Silk Bennett, is around, but never consistently. The man spends most of Von's childhood cycling in and out of prison, which means young Davon is learning about his own father the same way he later learned about everything else, in fragments, from the street, secondhand. Then comes the first warning sign, the one that predates all the others, the one nobody could have missed and yet everybody underestimated. When Von is 10 years old, Walter Bennett is shot and killed by a gunman who was never identified. Think about what that actually means for a second. No arrest, no trial, no answers. A 10-year-old boy buries his father knowing that somewhere out there, the person who did it is walking around free, and knowing that in his neighborhood, that's just how it goes. The police don't solve it, the system doesn't show up for him. What shows up instead is the block. And the block Von grew up on wasn't just any block. Parkway Gardens sits in Greater Grand Crossing on Chicago's South Side, and by the time Von is a teenager, it's the beating heart of the Black Disciples, one of the city's most established street organizations, founded decades earlier by David Barksdale, the man they call King David. The complex would eventually get renamed in street terms after O.D. Perry, a young man from the neighborhood who was killed, O Block in his memory. That's the culture Von was raised inside, a place where the dead don't just get buried, they get the whole territory named after them, where memory and war are the same thing. Now here's where the foundation gets real. Von wasn't some kid on the edges of the gang looking in. His street name told you everything. They called him grandson, as in the grandson of King David himself, the founder of the whole Black Disciples Nation. You don't get a name like that for rapping. You get a name like that because the streets have decided you carry the bloodline of the organization's spirit. That nickname alone was a warning sign flashing in neon years before anybody outside Chicago knew who he was. At Hyde Park Academy, Von actually showed another side. He played varsity baseball, walked the same hallways as future rap star G Herbo, and by all accounts had the kind of sharp mind that shows up later in his songwriting. But the pull up 64th and King Drive was stronger than anything a classroom offered. In January 2011, at 16 years old, Von caught his first serious case. armed robbery. He went to juvenile detention, and here's the detail that tells you who he was. While locked up, he earned his GED. The intelligence was real. He came home, enrolled in classes at South Suburban College in South Holland, Illinois, and for a minute, there was a fork in the road. He dropped out, the streets won, and according to the most controversial documentary in hip-hop history, 2012 is when the alleged killing started. Trap Lord Ross's film claims Von was involved in 5 murders in that year alone, when he was just 17 and 18 years old. Now let me be crystal clear, those are allegations built from social media posts, timestamps, lyrics, and police reports pieced together after his death, not convictions. Von was never charged with any 2012 homicide, but the doc's timeline matters to the story because it claims the pattern, the warning signs, started here in the era when Chicago drill was exploding and the war between Von's Black disciples and the rival Gangster Disciples factions was turning the South Side into a body count. To understand that war, you need to understand what was happening to Chicago at that exact moment. 2012 is the year drill music breaks nationally. Chief Keef's I Don't Like takes over the world from a couch in Inglewood. Lil Durk is rising, and suddenly the most dangerous neighborhood beefs in America have soundtracks, video budgets, and millions of viewers. Von is right there at the birth of it, connected to Keef and Durk through the neighborhood before he ever records a bar. But while they're becoming stars, Von is becoming something else. His reputation isn't musical, it's physical. The streets know his name for reasons that don't get played on the radio. And on the other side of that war, a name was rising that will become permanently tangled with Von's. A name that represents the first documented homicide investigation with Davon Bennett's name inside it. Gakira Barnes. The streets call her K.I. She was a teenage girl from the Gangster Disciples side of the conflict, and the internet would later mythologize her as one of the most feared alleged shooters in Chicago. A 17-year-old girl rumored, fairly or not, to be connected to multiple shootings herself. In the spring of 2014, K.I. and King Von were about to collide, and what happened next is where the warning signs stop being background noise and start becoming police paperwork. But here's where it gets crazy, because 2014 wasn't just one incident. It was 2 homicides in 2 months, and Von's name ended up in both files. April 11th, 2014, Gakira K.I. Barnes is standing with 2 other people near 6451 South Eberhard when, according to the police account later made public, a man in a gray hoodie and blue jeans walks up, pulls a handgun, and opens fire on the group, hitting all 3 before jumping into a vehicle and getting away. K.I. dies, she's 17 years old. Whatever she was or wasn't in the streets, she was a teenage girl, and her death sent a shockwave through Chicago that people still talk about a decade later. Now here's the part that stayed buried for 7 years. In 2021, after Von's death, police documents surfaced publicly, and what they said was staggering. According to those unearthed records, witnesses identified Davon Bennett as the gunman, and the documents state investigators concluded Barnes was killed by Bennett. Read that again? This isn't a YouTube theory. This is Chicago Police Department paperwork, reported on by outlets like Vlad TV, and the source stating that Bond was positively identified as the shooter in K.I.'s murder. So why was he never charged? According to the documents, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office reviewed the case, agreed Bennett had been identified as the offender, and then rejected charges anyway because they didn't believe they could meet the burden of proof in court. Witness inconsistencies. The Chicago special. Everybody knows, nobody testifies. At the time, in April 2014, Bond was questioned as a person of interest and released. Warning sign number. Honestly, I've lost count at this point. A 19-year-old is named by witnesses in the shooting death of a 17-year-old girl, and he walks out of the police station because the case can't hold. And what happens next? According to prosecutors and witness statements in a completely separate case, he's allegedly shooting again within weeks. May 29th, 2014, Inglewood, Chicago. A mother is throwing a birthday party for her son. She comes home from work around 5:15 in the evening to start cooking, and on her front porch she notices a face she recognizes. Davon Bennett, a known black disciple, at a party where members of the rival Gangster Disciples are present. She can feel the temperature of the room. According to witness accounts and police interviews, she walks straight up to Von and tells him not to start any mess in her house. Von smiles at her and tells her he's not on that, then he leaves. He comes back. According to the accounts that came out through the investigation and later reporting, Von left that party linked up with his guy Michael Big Mike Wade, grabbed a .40 caliber Smith & Wesson, a gun that had been purchased 840 miles away in Natchez, Mississippi, and trafficked up to Chicago and returned to the party to deal with the rival gang members who'd been mugging him. When the shooting starts, Vaughn is allegedly chasing one rival toward the front of the house, firing. Big Mike, by his own initial statement to police, is firing too. 15 to 16 rounds. One victim gets hit in the leg, runs, and then, according to his own account to officers, looks up to see Vaughn at the entrance to a lot pointing a handgun at him. 2 more shots. The man is hit in the face, his jaw shattered, and he survives to tell police exactly who did it. Malcolm Stuckey doesn't survive. And this is the part of the story where I need you to slow down and really sit with who Malcolm Stuckey was, because he is the human cost at the center of this whole timeline. Stuckey was 19 years old, a college student, a basketball player who'd fought through a knee injury in high school, the kind of kid a school security guard remembered as friendly with everybody. The band kids, the quiet kids, the ones nobody else noticed. He worked as a janitor at a museum. He wasn't in the war. He had just pulled up to his friend's birthday party in a burgundy Pontiac Grand Prix and stepped out to the sidewalk to smoke before heading to play basketball. He was a bystander in the most literal, most tragic sense of the word. When the shooting stopped, Malcolm Stuckey was face down on the grass between the sidewalk and the street, and he didn't get up. A bullet from that Mississippi-bought Smith & Wesson had struck him in the head. For real, whatever you believe about King Vaughn, whatever side of the serial killer debate you land on at the end of this video, hold Malcolm Stuckey's name in your mind the whole way through, because the warning signs we're talking about aren't abstract. They're measured in people like him. On July 24th, 2014, Vaughn was arrested and charged with 1 count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted murder for the Stuckey shooting. Big Mike was charged too, and with Big Mike cooperating, he'd already given police a detailed statement laying out the whole sequence. Prosecutors thought they had an open and shut case. Vaughn, 19 years old, with Chaos file already carrying his name, went into Cook County Jail. He would sit there for more than 3 years. And while he sat, the war outside kept eating everyone he loved. Let's talk about what 3.5 years in Cook County Jail does to a man awaiting trial for first-degree murder. Vaughn went in at 19 and wouldn't walk free until he was 23. Cook County isn't prison, it's pretrial detention, which means every day you wake up not knowing if you're going home in a month or dying behind a wall in 40 years. The Stuckey case carried the possibility of life. And Vaughn spent that entire stretch watching the outside world through phone calls and visits, while the old block generation he came up with either blew up in a rap game or got buried. Then came February 14th, 2017, Valentine's Day. On the south side of Chicago, a 23-year-old named T. Roy, King Vaughn's best friend, one of the most feared members of O Block, was shot and killed. Vaughn was still sitting in Cook County when the news reached him. He couldn't go to the scene, he couldn't go to the funeral the way a free man could. He could only sit in a cell and absorb it. Now, who was T. Roy? This is important because T. Roy's own story is a mirror of everything we're talking about. He wasn't a rapper, he had no music career, no brand, no public face. Street media outlets like Raptology described him after his death as fearless and dangerous, a top shooter for O Block. And Trapmore Ross would later dedicate an entire separate documentary just to the murders alleged to be connected to T. Roy, a list of street names that reads like a war memorial: Dale, Doc, Dirty Rel, Modell, Boss Trail, Lil James, Stunner, Billy Sargent, Lil Mark. And then a second list, the people whose deaths were believed to be connected to avenging T. Roy after he fell: Lil Ho, Jamo, Poppy, White Girl, FBG Brick, Kobe Mack, TB, his own brother HK, Get Right. One man's life and death, allegedly connected to that much bloodshed on both sides of the ledger. That was Vaughn's best friend. That was the man closest to his heart. And people who study this story point to T. Roy's death as one of the clearest inflection points in Vaughn's life. The moment grief stopped being something that happened to him and became something that defined him. His father's murder made him. The jail time hardened him. T. Roy's death, by the accounts of those who watched his rise afterward, gave him something to burn for. When Vaughn later blew up, T. Roy's name was all over his music, his interviews, his chains. The grief was the brand. And here's the uncomfortable question at the center of this video. When a man turns that much loss into that much fury, what do you think that fury turns into? While Vaughn grieved behind the wall, his murder case was quietly falling apart in the most Chicago way possible. Remember Big Mike, the co-defendant who gave police that detailed statement laying out the whole Stuckey shooting? When trial time came, Big Mike recanted. He refused to identify Vaughn in court. The other witnesses, they didn't show up. This is the code of silence in its purest form. The same force that killed the KI case killed the Stuckey case, and in December 2017, after more than 3 years in Cook County, a jury found Davon Bennett not guilty of the murder of Malcolm Stuckey. But here's the part of the acquittal story that will genuinely mess you up. Big Mike, Michael Wade, the man who recanted and refused to point Vaughn out at trial, didn't walk away clean. According to reporting and community accounts of the case, Wade was convicted on aggravated battery with a firearm from the same incident and got hit with 28 years. The man who kept the code, who wouldn't testify against Vaughn, essentially traded his own life for Vaughn's freedom. Vaughn walked out of Cook County in December 2017 a free man. Big Mike went the other direction, and Malcolm Stuckey's family got nothing. No conviction, no accountability, nobody. Federal investigators would eventually trace the murder weapon back to a Mississippi gun trafficker named Jonathan Smalley, who caught more than 5 years in federal prison for the gun buys. Meaning, when you tally it up, the man who bought the gun in Mississippi did more time in connection with Malcolm Stuckey's death than anyone who was actually there when he died. Let that sink in. So Vaughn comes home in December 2017. And here's where the story splits into 2 movies playing at the same time. In the first movie, it's a redemption arc for the ages. Lil Durk signs Vaughn to Only the Family almost immediately. And within months, Vaughn discovers he's not just a gangster who can rap, he's a natural born storyteller. In June 2018, he drops Beat That Body featuring THF Zoo. And peep the title because Vaughn himself was never shy about what beating a body means in Chicago slang. Both Vaughn and Zoo had beaten murder charges. The song was a victory lap. That same summer, he lands on Durk's Only the Family Involved compilation, and by December 2018, Crazy Story drops and changes everything. The song is a masterclass, a first-person heist gone wrong narrative so vivid it plays like a short film. It eventually goes triple platinum. Vaughn follows it with sequels, The Grandson Volume 1 mixtape, then Levon James, then The Crown Jewel, Welcome to O Block in 2020. Debuting top 5 on the Billboard 200. Critics who dismissed drill as noise had to admit the kid was a genuine writer. Took Her to the O cracks the Hot 100 and goes triple platinum too. In under 3 years, Vaughn goes from a Cook County cell to one of the hottest names in hip hop. That's the first movie. The second movie is the one the paperwork tells, because according to the Trap Lord Ross documentary's timeline, the alleged killing didn't stop when the music started. The doc claims Vaughn took another life in June 2018, right as his career was launching, and one more in March 2019. Again, allegations never charged, laid out through the doc's assembly of timestamps, posts, and police reports. But then there's the case that isn't just a documentary claim. It's a real arrest with real charges. May 2019, Vaughn and Lil Durk are both arrested in connection with the shooting outside the Varsity, the famous Atlanta drive-in. Prosecutors claim the 2 rappers robbed and shot a man named Alexander Witherspoon back in February of that year. Durk bonded out at $250,000, Vaughn at $300,000. The charges would eventually get dropped against Durk in 2022, but the arrest itself tells you the pattern followed Vaughn out of Chicago. Out of poverty, out of every circumstance that supposedly explained it. He was famous now, rich now, out of the trenches, and he was still catching gun cases in new cities. That's the thing about warning signs. Money doesn't erase them, it just buys them better lawyers. Fast forward to the summer of 2020, Vaughn is at the absolute peak of his powers. Welcome to O Block is on the way. The features are pouring in, and his interviews show a man who is funny, sharp, magnetic. If you only watched the first movie, you'd think the story was over. The kid made it out. Then, on August 4th, 2020, FBG Duck, a rapper from the rival gangster Disciples faction, one of O Block's most prominent enemies, the man behind the diss records that mock O Block's dead, is gunned down in broad daylight while shopping on Oak Street in Chicago's Gold Coast, one of the wealthiest shopping districts in the city. Multiple shooters jump out of vehicles and execute him in front of luxury storefronts. It's one of the most brazen murders in modern Chicago history, and it eventually becomes a federal racketeering case that puts 6 O Block members and associates on trial, a trial that ends in convictions in January 2024. Now here's where Vaughn's name comes back into the paperwork one last time from beyond the grave. In January 2023, more than 2 years after Vaughn's death, the FBI declassified documents related to the case. And inside those files was an informant's claim that stopped the internet cold. According to a confidential informant, Vaughn had initially placed a $50,000 bounty on FBG Duck's head. Let me say that clearly and carefully. That is an allegation from an informant inside declassified FBI paperwork, not a proven fact, and Vaughn was dead before Duck's killers ever went to trial, so it was never tested in court. Prosecutors at the O Block RICO trial laid out how deep Vaughn's money ran through the crew regardless, including that he spent $128,000 on domino block pendants from an Atlanta jeweler and handed them out to members like championship rings. Whatever Vaughn's exact role was or wasn't in the Duck situation, the federal government's own case painted him as the crown of the enterprise, its most famous face and its financial engine. And this is where Trap Lord Ross's most unsettling claim belongs in the timeline. The pattern he says he found when he lined up the alleged murders against Vaughn's own social media. According to Ross, speaking on Vlad TV, Vaughn had a habit of tweeting shortly after killings he was allegedly involved in. A digital tell, a man allegedly celebrating in plain sight, while the internet scrolled right past it. Ross argued that this, combined with the sheer alleged number of incidents and what he described as Vaughn's apparent personal gratification from violence, the way he smiled telling street stories in interviews, the way his lyrics lingered on details, fit the FBI's textbook definition of a serial killer. Ross went as far as saying that if Vaughn had lived, he believed the O Block indictment would have swallowed him too, and he'd likely be facing life right now. That's the case for the label. Now here's the honest pushback, because you deserve both sides. Vaughn was acquitted in the only murder trial he ever faced. The KI case was rejected by prosecutors themselves. The doc's 10 murder timeline is investigative journalism by a YouTuber, not a court record, compelling to millions but built on sources that were never cross-examined. His family called the serial killer label a desecration. His sister Kayla B and his day ones have defended his name relentlessly. And there's a structural argument too. Gang war violence, however horrific, doesn't map cleanly onto the serial killer framework, which is built to describe predators who kill strangers for psychological gratification, not teenagers raised inside a decades-old territorial war they were born into. Critics of the doc argued that slapping a true crime label on a dead black kid from Parkway Gardens flattens everything Chicago did to create him. Both things can be true at once. The alleged body count can be real, and the label can still be a debate. That's for you to decide. What's not debatable is what happened next. November 6, 2020. Vaughn is 26 years old. Welcome to O Block dropped exactly 1 week ago and it's already sitting top 5 on the Billboard 200. The world is watching. He's in Atlanta, which had become a second home for him, and most of the Chicago drill scene, a city that offered money, studio time, and a little distance from the South Side's constant heat. That night, Vaughn and his crew were outside Monaco Hookah Lounge on Lenox Road in Buckhead, one of Atlanta's upscale corridors. It's late, it's dark, and pulling up to the same spot that same night is Quando Rondo and his crew. Now, if you don't know the Von Quando beef, let me say it real quick. Quando Rondo was a rapper out of Savannah, Georgia, signed to Young Boy Never Broke Again's Never Broke Again LLC. For months, there'd been simmering tension between his circle and Von's, some of it born from the larger NBY versus Lil Durk AOTF beef, some of it personal. Nothing had gone fully public yet, but the tension was there, and everybody in both camps knew it. According to witnesses and Atlanta police accounts of what unfolded, what started outside Monaco Hookah Lounge began as a confrontation, words, then shoving, then the kind of moment that lasts about 4 seconds before it ends somebody's life. Gunfire erupted between both groups. Atlanta PD responded to the scene and officers engaged as well. In the chaos, they fired on a person they perceived as a threat. By the time the shooting was over, 3 people were wounded. One person from Quando's side was killed, and King Von had been shot multiple times. He was rushed to Wellstar Atlanta Medical Center. He died there in the early hours of November 6, 2020, 26 years old, 1 week after his debut album, Gone. Timothy Leaks, Lil Tim, a member of Quando Rondo's crew, was arrested at the scene and charged with Von's murder. That case would work its way through Georgia courts for years. Meanwhile, on social media, the immediate aftermath was one of the most chaotic nights hip-hop Twitter had ever seen. Rumors flying, false reports, Quando's team going live, Von's team in shock. By morning, when the reality was confirmed, the grief across the rap world was immediate and overwhelming. Lil Durk, who'd signed Von, mentored him and called him a little brother, posted and then went silent. Asian Doll, Von's girlfriend at the time, was inconsolable in public. Every major figure in Chicago and the hip-hop said something. The tributes were real. But here's the thing about the day King Von died. It wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new chapter of it. One that revealed just how deep the roots of O Block ran and how far-reaching the consequences of that whole world were. Because the war didn't stop when Von fell, the retaliation was coming. In October 2024, 4 years after Von's death, federal prosecutors in Miami arrested Lil Durk. Not for music, not for old street charges. They charged him with conspiracy to commit murder for hire, alleging that Durk had orchestrated a plot to take out Quando Rondo himself in retaliation for Von's killing. According to the indictment, that plot allegedly resulted in the death of Quando Rondo's cousin, Xavier Lil Pab Robinson. 5 members of Durk's Only the Family collective were arrested alongside him. The man who gave Von his first record deal, who built OTF into one of Chicago's most commercially successful music labels, was now sitting in federal custody facing murder conspiracy charges, all because of what happened outside a hookah lounge on November 6, 2020. That's the reach of one night. That's the reach of one name. And then there's the O Block RICO case, the racketeering trial that ended in January 2024, with convictions across the board against 6 members and associates of the O Block crew. That trial revealed things about the world Von came from that even people who followed the story closely didn't know. A gang member testified under oath about who led the organization. The $128,000 in domino block pendants Von bought in Atlanta got entered into evidence. Prosecutors built a picture of O Block not just as a neighborhood crew, but as a structured criminal enterprise that had operated for years, and Von's name was woven through that picture at every level, as its most famous member, as its money source, and according to that declassified FBI informant claim, as the man who first put a price on FBG Duck. One of the O Block defendants, Rashawn Mona Duke Vance, identified in court as one of the crew's leaders, would later be shot and killed himself in May 2025 outside a restaurant in Chicago's Edgewater neighborhood, gunned down along with another man in a hit where shooters fired at least 50 rounds. The cycle kept cycling years after the man at the center of it all was in the ground. Even Lil Tim, the man charged with Von's actual murder, had his case drag on for years in Georgia courts, the case moving slowly through continuances and hearings. A reminder that in the American justice system, even the clearest street-level cases move at their own speed. The man who took King Von's life was still working his way through the courts as the legacy of that one night kept claiming new casualties. No cap, when you lay it all out like this, end to end, from November 2004 when Von's father Walter got shot and killed by an unknown gunman on a Chicago street, all the way to October 2024 when Lil Durk got arrested in Miami for a murder plot allegedly born out of grief for Von. That's 20 years of consequences from one neighborhood, one crew, one set of wars, and King Von sits at the absolute center of it. Here's the thing about King Von that separates him from every other name in this story, and it's the thing that makes the warning signs conversation so uncomfortable. The man put it all in the music, not metaphorically, specifically, brutally, with details that only a person who lived it could know. Crazy Story is the obvious one, a song narrated in first person about a robbery that goes sideways, full of tactical detail about how the story unfolds second by second. But listen deeper, and the pattern runs through everything. Took Her to the O is a song so specific about what happens to a girl brought into O Block that the description functions as testimony, not entertainment. Demon, released posthumously, is a meditation on violence that doesn't flinch. His freestyles over beats, his story songs, his ad-libs. Von wasn't a rapper who borrowed street imagery. He was a man describing his own life in the plainest possible language, and the world called it art. Trap Lord Ross made the argument on Vlad TV that Von's lyrics aren't just inspired by true events. They are the true events, filtered through the thinnest possible layer of artistic deniability. That specific detail about the gun type, the exact description of how a body falls, the cold accuracy of how it felt, Not what it felt like in a movie, but what it actually felt like on a South Side Chicago street. Ross argued that if Vaughn had been alive and those lyrics were entered into evidence at a murder trial, they would not have helped his defense. Now, courts have long struggled with this exact question. Can rap lyrics be used as confessions? It's a genuine legal debate that's played out in case after case across the country, from Young Thug's RICO indictment in Georgia to trials in New York and New Jersey, where prosecutors tried to enter rap lyrics as evidence of criminal intent. Courts have gone both ways, and civil rights advocates have pushed back hard on the practice, pointing out that treating rap music as autobiography is a trap that primarily ensnares black artists, that no one asks whether a country singer actually shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. So here's the real question, the one this whole video has been building toward. Does it matter? For the people Vaughn is alleged to have killed, for Malcolm Stuckey, for Kikira Barnes, for everyone on that list, whether we call it art or evidence, whether we call Vaughn a serial killer or a gang war survivor, doesn't change what happened to them. The warning signs were there in the police files, they were there in the Cook County court dockets, they were there in the KI investigation paperwork that sat in a drawer until he was already dead. And they were there loud and in plain view in every bar he ever recorded. A man describing a life that the system kept failing to address with every tool except the one that ended up mattering most, stopping it before it went any further. For real, think about every intersection where the story could have gone differently. If Vaughn's father's killer had been caught, if that wound had been answered with justice instead of silence, would a 10-year-old boy have grown up believing the only answer to violence is more violence? If Cook County could have gotten that KI case across the finish line in April 2014, would the Stuckey shooting have happened a month later? If the witnesses in the Stuckey case hadn't vanished, if Big Mike hadn't recanted, would Vaughn have come home in 2017 with a fundamentally different relationship to consequence? We can't know, but we can name every junction where the system that was supposed to see the warning signs either looked away, ran out of witnesses, or simply ran out of leverage. That's the part that doesn't make it onto the playlist. That's the part the streaming numbers don't tell you. And that's the part that matters most if you actually want to understand how a brilliant kid from Parkway Gardens ended up becoming the most controversial figure in modern hip-hop history. Not just for how he died, but for everything he allegedly left behind him on the way. Let's go straight at the center of everything the serial killer label. Because whether you think it fits or not, the conversation that label started is one of the most important debates hip-hop has had in the last decade, and it deserves to be handled with full honesty on all sides. Trap Lord Ross didn't coin the term to disrespect Vaughn, or at least that's what he said when he sat down for that Vlad TV interview. And for what it's worth, the case he laid out was specific enough to take seriously. The FBI's definition of a serial killer is 3 or more murders, committed in separate events with cooling off periods in between. If you accept the documentary's timeline, 5 alleged killings in 2012, 3 more in 2014, 1 in June 2018, 1 in March 2019, then not only does the number exceed that threshold, but the pattern of distinct events spread across years maps almost exactly onto the textbook definition Ross cited. He wasn't comparing Vaughn to Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer in the serial killer mythology sense. He was applying a clinical framework and arguing that the same standard we apply to cases that make the news should apply here too. Now the counter argument from Vaughn's family and fans is layered and real. First, no murder conviction, not one. In the only case that ever made it to trial, Malcolm Stuckey, a jury acquitted him. Every other case either didn't make it to charges or was rejected by prosecutors. In American law, acquittal matters. Second, the documentary itself was built from circumstantial evidence. Social media timestamps, lyric analysis, police documents that show Vaughn was a person of interest, but never show a courtroom proving it. Third, the serial killer framework, as critics have pointed out, was developed to describe predatory loners who target random victims, not individuals embedded in decades-long territorial gang conflicts that preceded them by generations. When Vaughn was allegedly shooting in 2012, he was 17 or 18 years old, living in a neighborhood at war where the opposing side had allegedly already taken people close to him. Context doesn't erase consequences, but it does complicate labels. And fourth, the racial dimension is real. A white musician who rapped with this level of detail about personal violence would be treated as an edgy artist, not a suspect. The leap from he's authentic in his lyrics to he's confessing to murders has been used disproportionately against black artists and courts across the country for the last 20 years. Both sides of that debate deserve to be heard, and neither side changes the reality of what happened to the people named in those police files. But here's what the serial killer conversation reveals that matters beyond the label itself. It forced a reckoning with what hip-hop's most loyal fans actually believe about the music they love. For years, the community that built King Von's audience ran on the understanding that the stories in his songs were real, that Von's credibility came precisely from the fact that he lived what he rapped. That's what made Crazy's story feel different from other street records. That's why Took Her to the O had people in the streets talking. The authenticity was the whole point. And then when a documentary showed up and said, okay, so if we take all of this seriously, as real, as factual, what does that make the man who did it? A significant portion of that same audience suddenly decided, no, this is just music, this is just art, you can't hold a rapper to his own lyrics like that. That contradiction is the warning sign nobody talks about. It's the one that belongs not to Von, but to all of us. The culture built around celebrating the music, the pain, the war, without ever fully accounting for the people on the other end of those stories. The ones who didn't get a record deal. The ones who went to birthday parties and never came home. That's not a condemnation of drill music. Drill at its best is journalism about a world that mainstream America refuses to look at. But the warning signs that nobody saw around King Von weren't hidden in some filing cabinet. They were in the verses, on the airwaves, triple platinum certified. We heard them, we turned them up, and we called them art. For real, that's the conversation this video exists to have. Not to cash in on a dead man's legacy for clicks, but to sit with the full weight of what it means when a story like his becomes background noise, when the murders alleged in police documents become lyrical trivia for fans, when a mother in Inglewood buries her 19-year-old son, who just went to a birthday party and nobody outside Chicago learns his last name for 7 years. Malcolm Stuckey deserves to be more than a footnote in a rapper's biography. Here's why I want to be real with you, because this story isn't simple and I'm not going to pretend it is. King Von the rapper, Daquan Bennett the artist, was genuinely undeniably gifted. Crazy Story is one of the best narrative rap songs recorded in the last decade, full stop. His voice, his delivery, his ability to build tension and character in a 4-minute song, those are real things, documented in platinum certifications and critical praise from people who aren't easily impressed. The posthumous albums Welcome to a Block, What It Means to Be King, and Grandson have done numbers that most living rappers can't pull. His influence on the storytelling tradition within drill is permanent. Young Chicago rappers study his cadence the same way film students study cinematographers. That part of his legacy is real. And King Von the street figure, whatever the full truth of his alleged involvement in the violence that surrounded O Block, also left behind something more personal and more painful. A crew of brothers, associates, and fans who loved him genuinely, whose grief after November 6, 2020 was as real as grief gets. His sister Kayla B has built her own career in his memory. His children didn't choose any of this. The people of O Block who grew up with him and survived carried the loss the way you carry the loss of someone you've been in the trenches with since you were teenagers. That grief is human, and no argument about labels or documents changes it. But here's what the warning signs nobody saw left behind too. Lil Durk, Von's mentor, his OTF label head, his brother in every sense people use that word, is now sitting in federal custody as of October 2024, charged with murder conspiracy, facing a possible life sentence, allegedly because the grief of losing Von couldn't be left unanswered. 5 OTF members swept up alongside him. That is the legacy of the cycle. The costs don't stop when the most prominent person dies. They accelerate, they compound, they find new targets. Lil Pop, Quando Rondo's cousin, a man with his own family, his own life, his own people, allegedly lost his life as collateral in a revenge plot for a war he didn't start. Munna Duke, one of the last alleged O Block leaders left standing, cut down in May 2025. The pendants Von bought for $128,000 are still sitting in federal evidence boxes. This is what happens when the warning signs go unaddressed at the source. Not just the individual, the structures, the block without economic opportunity, the school that loses Von at 16 to juvenile detention and never gets him back, the murder of a father that produces a decade of unresolved grief in his son, The court system that couldn't get a single witness to testify and called it a closed case. The music industry that signed Von the second he walked out of Cook County, that monetized his danger and his trauma and made it premium content, that never once had a conversation with him that ended with, hey, we need to talk about what's actually going on. All of those systems saw the warning signs and decided for various reasons that they were someone else's problem. And then there's the question of what Von's story does to the next generation. The 15-year-olds in Parkway Gardens right now who grew up hearing Crazy Story before they grew up hearing much else, who see the numbers, the platinum, the culture, who understand through the only language the culture speaks to them, that the way out is through, that the grind includes what the grind includes. That's not Von's fault. That's the ecosystem. But the ecosystem takes real people and makes real choices with them. And Von's story is one of the realest examples this era has produced. Today, the O Block story is a federal case record. Von's music is still running up streams every single day. His face is on murals from Chicago to Atlanta. Lil Durk is fighting for his freedom in Miami. Malcolm Stuckey's mother is still in Inglewood. And somewhere out there, a documentary about a rapper who may have been the most prolific alleged street killer in hip-hop history is sitting on YouTube, 3.5 hours long, built from tweets and police reports and lyrics, and it has millions of views. Because people are paying attention now, even if they weren't when it might have mattered. The warning signs nobody saw weren't hard to find. They were right there, in the poverty that shaped the block, in the father's murder with no arrest, in the KI police file that sat in a drawer, in the witness who recanted and took 28 years to protect someone else's freedom, in the bars of every song Von ever recorded, delivered with a calm that people called charisma and police called something else entirely. The real warning sign was this. We built a culture that makes it profitable to be the most dangerous man in the room, then act surprised when dangerous men exist. Davon Bennett was real. The stories were real. The losses were real. The consequences for him, for his victims' families, for his circle, for everyone the war touched before and after him, were as real as anything gets. That's the story of King Von. Not the platinum, not the serial killer label, not the hookah lounge in Atlanta. The story is every junction with a whole machine. The streets, the system, the industry, the culture looked at those warning signs and kept moving. And we're still moving until the next one outroll. That was the full story of King Von. The warning signs that were in plain sight from the day his father got shot in the Chicago street to the federal paperwork that's still being processed today. If this video hit different for you, you know what to do. Subscribe, turn on the notifications, because we going deep on these stories every week. No filter, maximum respect for the real ones. The homie who knows all the street tea is right here. Drop in the comments what story you want next, because I see everything you send. And if you haven't heard his music, go listen. Not because it glorifies anything, but because you need to hear what a warning sign sounds like when it's in 4/4 time and triple platinum certified. King Von was here. Davon Bennett was real. And the story isn't over. I need to come back to Gakira Barnes, because to rush her story is to miss the most historically significant piece of this whole puzzle. This is the context that connects everything. Von's alleged first murder, the birth of the FBG Duck War, the 2020 Gold Coast assassination, and the federal RICO case that finally dragged the whole chain into a courtroom. It all runs through one 17-year-old girl shot 9 times on the South Side porch in 2014. Gakira K.I. Barnes was born January 21st, 1997. She grew up in the Woodlawn area of Chicago's South Side, another neighborhood suffocating under the same structural violence that produced O Block. Her father was shot and killed before she had her first birthday. 2 of her closest childhood friends were also murdered while she was still a child. If you're looking for the origins of who she became, they start the same place Von started, a father's murder. No answer, no justice, no closure. Just a child left to make sense of it alone. She was introduced to the gangster disciples at 14 through a group of boys in her neighborhood, and by the time she was 15, she was reportedly in the streets in ways that no teenager should be in the streets. By 2011, Gakira Barnes had a Twitter following and a street reputation that operated in tandem. A 2016 Columbia University study found she had posted over 27,000 tweets from 2011 to April 2014. And researchers described her feed as a real-time documentation of gang life and conflict. She was reportedly a shooter for the St. Lawrence Boys, the gangster disciples faction most directly at war with O Block. The things she allegedly did in that role was so significant that when she died, Street media says she had allegedly claimed 17 bodies by the age of 17. There is no way to verify that number. She was never charged with a single homicide, but the name she carried in the streets was enormous. And one of the people she was most directly credited with hitting was O.D. Perry, the young man whose murder prompted O Block to rename itself in his memory. If that's true, then K.I. is directly responsible for the name on the door of the whole enterprise. So in the spring of 2014, you have two teenage killers on either side of the same street. O Block to the west of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. drive K.I.'s STL to EBT Gangsta Disciples faction to the east. The hatred between them was generational, documented, and deeply personal. And on April 11, 2014, somebody came looking for Dakira Barnes. That day, K.I. posted a photo of herself and her friends on the porch of a home in Woodlawn. The picture went up on Twitter with the location visible. Hours later, according to witness accounts later provided to police, a man wearing a gray hoodie and blue jeans walked up to 6451 South Eberhard, produced a handgun, and opened fire on Barnes and the two people with her, striking all three. Barnes was shot 9 times. She crawled to a nearby porch where she lost consciousness. She died in a hospital. 2 hours later, a fatal gunshot wound to the neck. She was 17 years old. Now here's where the federal case adds something the 2021 FOIA documents only hinted at. In a 68-page court memo filed ahead of the FBG Duck murder trial, prosecutors laid out new detail from an eyewitness they hadn't previously disclosed publicly. According to that filing, reported by the Chicago Sun-Times, Barnes' own brother witnessed what happened at Eberhard Avenue. He told prosecutors that King Von, described in the filing as a leader of a block, stood over his sister and fired multiple times. Barnes' brother was himself wounded in the shooting but survived and fled. That is not a FOIA document pulled from a drawer by a Reddit user. That is federal prosecutors in a court of law relying on a witness who was present, Barnes' own sibling, to describe what they saw. And then there's the song angle, the one that made even people who dismissed the serial killer documentary stop and think. Shortly after K.I.'s death, Von recorded a track called Wait. People in Chicago who knew the story heard specific details in those bars, details that matched the circumstances of Barnes' killing, and read them as a confession wrapped in a verse. Von never admitted it publicly. The song existed, the details were there, and for years in Chicago's street media ecosystem, this was not a theory but a widely understood fact. Something the whole South Side already knew while the music industry was still calling him an up-and-coming storyteller. Here's the thing about K.I. that gets overlooked in the way her story is told. She was also 17. She was also a product of the same machine. Same absent father murdered before she could know him. Same neighborhood at war. Same world that offered guns faster than it offered options. Whatever she allegedly did in those 3 years between 14 and 17, she was also a child. And on the day she died, the war she was in came to her front porch in a gray hoodie and didn't give her any more time. The same war that took Von's father. The same war that took T-Roy. The same war that, according to prosecutors, eventually took FBG Duck on Oak Street in front of $1 Million boutiques. The war doesn't care about age or talent or potential. It just keeps going. And the critical piece that prosecutors laid out in the FBG Duck trial is this. K.I.'s death didn't end the war. It escalated it. Her Gangsta Disciples faction, the STL, the EBT crew, didn't absorb the loss quietly. They retaliated. And the cycle that had started with O.D. Perry, that had rolled through K.I., that had swallowed T-Roy on Valentine's Day 2017, kept rolling. FBG Duck came from the same faction as K.I. He rapped about the same enemies. He made records that mocked O Block's dead by name. According to federal prosecutors, he represented the continuation of everything that had started back in 2011, 2012, 2013. The war that Von allegedly entered as a teenager and never left. When Duck was executed on Oak Street in August 2020, prosecutors argued that a direct line ran from O.D. Perry's death in 2011 to that moment 9 years later. King Von's alleged role in K.I.'s death was a link in that chain, one that a federal court would use to explain why FBG Duck ended up dead in the wealthiest shopping corridor in the city. That's what the warning signs were pointing toward. Not just individual acts of violence, but a machine of escalation that turned every death into a justification for the next one, that turned grief into an operational plan that ran for almost a decade and swallowed everyone who touched it, famous or not, rapper or not, 17 years old or not. Here's something that rarely gets discussed in any depth when people talk about King Von's development as both a rapper and as a man. 3.5 years in Cook County Jail, awaiting trial on a first-degree murder charge, is one of the most psychologically specific experiences in American life, and it matters enormously to understanding who Von was when he walked out. Cook County Jail on California Avenue on the west side of Chicago is one of the largest single-site jails in the country. Pre-trial, everyone inside is technically still innocent, but the conditions are conditions. Overcrowding, constant threat, violence between detainees, prolonged uncertainty. You go in at 19 on a murder charge and you sit. You don't know if you're going home in a year or dying at 50 behind a wall. You can't properly grieve. You can't protect your people. You can only sit and watch through a phone screen as the world moves. Vaughn went in as an already respected street figure. He came out as something harder. People who interacted with him in the period right after his release in December 2017 have described the change, the sharpness behind his eyes, the calm that never left his face even in situations that would have most people sweating. The prison demeanor, the man who smiled slowly and said very little unless he was rapping, and then said everything. Lil Durk in interviews talked about signing Von almost immediately after his release because he recognized something in him that the jail had crystallized rather than broken. That's the thing about trauma absorbed at a young age inside a system designed to contain rather than rehabilitate. It doesn't make you weaker, it makes you colder. And cold in the drill music lane reads as credibility. But while Vaughn was sitting in Cook County, T-Roy died. And that is the wound that changed him in ways the jail itself couldn't. Because jail was something Vaughn understood. It was a structure, it had rules. You could adapt. But the phone call about T-Roy on February 14th, 2017, your best friend gone and you're behind a wall, unable to do anything, unable to bury him properly, unable to be there for the people who are grieving. That's a helplessness that sits in a man and doesn't move. People who study grief in incarcerated individuals note that the inability to process loss communally, to attend funerals, to be present in the aftermath is one of the most psychologically damaging aspects of incarceration. It freezes grief, it doesn't let it move through, it just sits there and calcifies. When Vaughn got out in December 2017, T-Roy had been dead for almost a year, and Vaughn had grieved him alone, through glass, on phone calls. And now he was free, and the person he would have walked out with wasn't there. In interview after his music blew up, you can see how T-Roy never left him. The songs, the chains, the tributes, T-Roy's memory was operating like a compass. And for some people who studied Von's post-release behavior closely, the deaths of friends, T-Roy most specifically, are the emotional engine behind everything that allegedly happened after. Not the gang war in the abstract, not the black disciples versus gangster disciples in the structural sense, but the personal human grief of losing your closest person while you were locked in a box and couldn't do a single thing about it. That kind of grief, unprocessed, has a way of finding an outlet. In Von's case, the outlet he found was music. That much is documented and real. What else that grief might have expressed itself in is the part that will be debated as long as people talk about this story. One of the most specific and unsettling claims in Trap Lord Ross's documentary is the social media pattern. The allegation that Vaughn had a habit of going online shortly after killings he was allegedly connected to, posting in ways that when placed against the timeline of incidents read like a man processing something in public that he couldn't say directly. This is the piece of the documentary that's hardest to dismiss on purely methodological grounds, because it doesn't rely on interpretation of lyrics or secondhand street accounts. It relies on timestamps, publicly visible, platform verified, difficult to fake. Ross said in multiple interviews after the documentary dropped that he'd gone through Von's social media archive systematically, tweet by tweet, post by post, and cross-referenced the dates and times of killings he was investigating with Von's online activity. The pattern he said he found: in multiple instances, Von was active on social media in the hours following incidents he was allegedly involved in, sometimes posting things that, while not explicit, registered to people who knew the context as something more than regular posting. The Trap Lord Ross methodology was never tested in court. There are obvious limitations. Correlation isn't causation. The timeline interpretations require accepting the documentary's premises about which incidents Von was allegedly involved in. but the people who came forward to debunk it couldn't quite debunk the timestamps themselves. The receipts were there on the platform. The question was what they meant. And here's where the lyric confession angle intersects with the Twitter angle in a way that made the serial killer documentary compelling enough to pull millions of views despite being taken down and fought by Vaughn's family. It wasn't one piece of evidence. It was a pattern of pieces, each individually arguable, that in aggregate pointed in one direction. Police documents, witness statements, FOIA disclosures, lyrical specifics, social media timestamps, a federal racketeering case that eventually validated significant parts of the underlying story about O'Block's structure and activities. No single piece was a conviction, but taken together, they built a picture that the people in Chicago who always known didn't need a documentary to explain to them. The warning signs nobody saw weren't invisible, they were structural. The system was built to handle each piece in isolation. One FOIA request here, one rejected prosecution there, one acquittal somewhere else, and never assembled a whole picture while there was still time to do something with it. By the time the full picture was visible to the public, Vaughn was dead. The war he'd allegedly been fighting had claimed him, and the paperwork that named him as a killer was released to the internet, where it got more views in a week than the Cook County court system processed in a year. That's what it means when the warning signs go unaddressed. Eventually, the story tells itself. Just too late for everyone who needed it to be told sooner. After everything in this video, every police document, every court record, every FBI declassification, every lyric break, I want to end by saying something that gets lost when a story gets this complicated. Daquan Bennett was a human being. He was also funny, not rapper funny, performing for the camera funny. He was genuinely, naturally funny, the kind of person who lit up a room with a deadpan line and then looked away like he didn't just say anything. Watch his interviews from 2019 and 2020, the ones where he's fully himself, talking about his kids, about his neighborhood, about the album he was building. He was a man who loved deeply his daughter, his siblings, his people. The grief he carried for everyone he lost is the grief of someone who actually felt it, not someone performing pain for an audience. He was also, by everything that can be documented, a product of a system that devoured him and made money off the wreckage, a system that killed his father and called it unsolved, that locked him up at 16 for armed robbery and gave him a GED instead of a path, that held him for 3 years awaiting trial, then watched him walk out and sign him to a record deal that monetized every single dark thing he'd been through. That system is still running. It will find the next Vaughn. It already has. The warning signs nobody saw with King Vaughn were a roadmap. Not a roadmap of an individual's inevitable criminality, but a roadmap of exactly what every institution that was supposed to intervene chose not to, or couldn't, or simply didn't have the resources. Every closed homicide file, every dismissed witness, every trauma absorbed without treatment, every loss grieved alone in a cell, pointed forward to exactly what happened on November 6, 2020, outside a hookah lounge in Atlanta. You couldn't have predicted the exact address, but you could have predicted the destination. King Von was 26 years old. He died 1 week after his debut album. He had more talent in his flow than most rappers develop in a career. He also, according to police documents that carry his name, FBI files that name him in conspiracy claims, and a federal racketeering case that positioned him at the center of a decade-long criminal enterprise, allegedly lived a parallel life that the music never fully disguised because the music wasn't designed to disguise it. The music was the confession, and the confession was the art, and the art was the product, and the product made millions. And the millions didn't change a single thing about who he was or what was coming. That's the warning sign that was always the loudest, and the one that the culture has still never really answered. What do we do when the thing we love is built on something we should have stopped? What do we owe to Malcolm Stuckey's family when we stream a song that may reference his death? What do we owe to a 10-year-old kid in Parkway Gardens who watched his father get shot and was never given a single meaningful resource to help him make sense of it? King Von is gone, but the machine that made him is still running. And that's the most important warning sign of all.
I see them X's on the wall, nigga. I know where we at, nigga. Fuck you talking about?
The Memphis raping serial killer CEO Jizzle, the name CEO Jizzle, has become one of the most controversial names discussed in Memphis street culture. Across social media, rap blogs, and online forums, countless stories, accusations, and theories have circulated about his alleged connections to violent incidents that have fueled years of speculation. Supporters argue that much of what people believe comes from rumors and internet narratives, while critics point to the growing list of claims that continue to follow his name. In this video, we're breaking down the timeline behind those allegations, the people whose names have repeatedly surfaced in these discussions, the connection many online commentators have made to the aftermath of Young Dolph's murder, and how a relatively unknown rapper became the subject of one of the most debated street legends in Memphis. From viral posts and police investigations to courtroom developments and internet detectives piecing together clues, this story sits at the intersection of rap culture, street politics, and the power of online speculation. What is fact? What is rumor? And how did CEO Jizzle become such a polarizing figure? That's exactly what we're about to uncover. But before we get into any of that, hit the subscribe button right now, because this channel does not sugarcoat nothing. We break down the stories that the mainstream blogs skip over, the ones that live in comment sections and late-night Twitter threads, the ones where the real Memphis history is being written in real time. If you're already subscribed, drop a comment right now. Tell me, had you heard of CEO Jizzle before this video? Let's see how many of y'all already know the name. And if you don't know the name yet, by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why this man became one of the most talked about figures in Memphis street culture. And you will understand the full context of what is alleged, what is confirmed, and what remains one of the most heated debates the internet has seen in years. Because this is not a simple story. This is not a story with a clean beginning, a clean middle, and a clean ending. This is Memphis. And in Memphis, nothing is ever that simple. Let's get into it. All right, fam, let's establish the facts first, because in a story like this, the facts and the rumors need to be separated clearly, and then we'll let you decide what you believe. CEO Jizzle, whose real name is Jalen Johnson, is a Memphis-based rapper. He is the cousin of the late, great Young Dolph, born Adolph Robert Thornton Jr., one of the most beloved independent rappers in hip-hop history. That family connection alone would have put CEO Jizzle on the radar of anyone who follows Memphis rap culture, but it was not the connection that made his name go viral in the streets and on the internet. That came later. That came from a completely different set of circumstances. Circumstances that, depending on who you ask, either confirm everything the streets say about him or confirm nothing at all, except that this man has survived more than most rappers ever will. Now here's what you need to understand about Memphis street culture before we go any further, because without this context, none of what follows will make complete sense. Memphis is not a city where beef stays online. It never has been. It is a city with a deeply embedded legacy of real street politics. It is a city with a deeply embedded legacy of real street politics. A legacy that goes back decades before social media ever existed, before YouTube existed, before any of us were sitting here watching and making content about it. The rap scene that gave us 3 6 Mafia, Young Dolph, Yo Gotti, Black Youngsta, Pooh Shiesty, Big 30, and Key Glock, that scene did not exist in a vacuum. It grew up out of some of the most volatile neighborhoods in the entire United States. North Memphis, South Memphis, Orange Mound, Castalia Heights, Whitehaven, Hickory Hill. These are neighborhoods where the politics are real, where the beefs have histories that stretch back generations, and where music and the streets have always been intertwined in ways that are almost impossible for an outsider to fully understand. When people say Memphis is different, they are not being poetic. They mean it literally. The way business gets handled in Memphis, the way beefs escalate and resolve in Memphis, the way loyalty is measured and tested in Memphis, it operates by a code that is specific to that city, to its geography, to its history, and to its culture. And that code is the backdrop against which the entire CEO Jizzle story plays out. CEO Jizzle grew up in that world. He is not a transplant. He is not someone who moved to Memphis to be near the rap scene. He is from Memphis. He is blood of Memphis. And when the allegations about him started circulating online, allegations we're going to break down in full detail in this video. The street credibility that came along with those allegations came not just from who he is, but from who his cousin was. Young Dolph was not just a rapper. Young Dolph was a symbol of independence, of standing your ground, of never bowing down to the politics of the industry or the streets, in a genre that has always had tensions between artists who navigate their way through political hierarchies and those who simply refuse to acknowledge those hierarchies exist. Young Dolph was the latter in its purest form. He said no to CMG. He said no to every label that tried to get their hands on what he built. He said no to compromise, and he built Paper Route Empire from scratch as a result, turning it into one of the most respected independent operations in rap. For a lot of people in Memphis, the idea that Young Dolph's cousin might have stepped up in the aftermath of Dolph's murder was not just plausible. It fit a very specific emotional and cultural logic. It fit the narrative of what loyalty looks like when it is real rather than performed. It fit the idea that what Dolph represented, that uncompromising, unapologetic, ride-or-die energy, did not die with him on November 17, 2021. That maybe it lived on. That maybe someone carried it forward. But here's where it gets complicated, and here is where we have to slow down and be precise. We are not talking about confirmed facts. We are talking about allegations. We are talking about internet speculation. We are talking about a situation where no arrests have been publicly tied to CEO Jizzle for the specific acts that the internet attributes to him. And in a city like Memphis, where speculation can get people killed, that distinction is not just a legal technicality. It is a matter of life and death. People have been shot and killed over internet rumors. People have been harmed over YouTube comment sections. The stakes of getting this wrong are not abstract. So we are going to be rigorous here. We are going to separate what is confirmed from what is alleged every single time for the entire duration of this video, and then we are going to let you make your own judgment about what all of it means. So let's go back. Let's build the foundation, because to understand CEO Jizzle, you first have to understand Young Dolph. And to understand Young Dolph, you first have to understand the city that made him. You have to understand Memphis. Let's rewind. Let's go back to the early 2000s, because the seeds of everything we're going to talk about today were planted a long time before November 17th, 2021. They were planted decades ago in the soil of a city that the rest of America has consistently underestimated and consistently misunderstood. Memphis has always had its own sound and its own rules. The city that gave the world the blues, gave the world soul music, gave the world Elvis Presley and Al Green and 3-6 Mafia. Memphis does not follow trends. Memphis sets them, and Memphis buries them, and Memphis moves on to the next thing before the rest of the country has even caught up to the last one. The Memphis rap scene that emerged in the late 1980s and exploded through the 1990s was unlike anything else happening in hip-hop at the time. The production was dark, horrorcore before the term was widely used. The subject matter was raw and real in ways that even other southern rap scenes weren't fully matching. The artists came from neighborhoods where survival was genuinely not guaranteed on a day-to-day basis. DJ Zerk, Playa Fly, Tommy Wright III, Skinny Pimp, 211. These were artists making music about a Memphis that the mainstream barely knew existed, and they were doing it independently on cassette tapes sold out of car trunks and corner stores and swap meets. No label deals, no radio play, no cosigns from New York or Los Angeles, just the music and the streets and the people who needed both. That independent spirit became foundational to Memphis rap culture in a way that distinguished it from almost every other major rap city. When 3-6 Mafia eventually broke nationally and eventually won an Oscar, the first hip-hop act to do so, they did it on their own terms, with their own sound, in their own way. And when the generation of artists that came after them rose up, they inherited that same ethos. You do it your way. You do not compromise. You do not bow. Nobody embodied that inheritance more completely than Adolph Robert Thornton Jr., Young Dolph. Dolph started putting out mixtapes in the late 2000s and started gaining real traction in the early 2010s. He was not an overnight success. He built his following the old way. Show by show, tape by tape, market by market. He established himself in Memphis first, then radiated outward. And critically, he did it without signing to anyone. In 2010, he founded Paper Route Empire. Not Paper Route Empire as a vanity imprint handed to him by a major label as part of a deal. His own label, his own infrastructure, his own money, his own operation. The business model was straightforward and powerful. Release music consistently, own your masters, keep the money in your pocket. By the time the wider music industry caught up to what he was doing, Dolph had already proven the concept. His fifth studio album, Rich Slave, peaked at number 4 on the Billboard 200 in 2020, without a major label, without a traditional promo budget, just the music and the loyalty of his fan base. Under the PRE umbrella, he signed his cousin-in-law Key Glock, who has gone on to become one of the most successful artists to ever come out of Memphis. And in the family and camp structure that surrounded PRE, other relatives and close associates were part of the extended network. CEO Jizzle, as Dolph's cousin, existed within that orbit. Now this matters for our story because of what that independence put Dolph up against, because Memphis is a city where certain camps have always held power, and the most significant power center in Memphis rap by the time Dolph was coming up was Yo Gotti and his label, originally called Cocaine Music Group, later rebranded as Collective Music Group, CMG. Gotti had been in the rap game since the late 1990s. He was one of the first Memphis rappers to achieve sustained national success, and he built CMG into a genuine operation, a label with real infrastructure, real industry relationships, and real leverage. And when young Dolph started making noise and making money without touching any of that infrastructure, without acknowledging it, without paying any kind of respect to it, without needing any of it, that created friction. That kind of independence is threatening when the power structure you're refusing to engage with has been built on the premise that you need to go through them. Dolph was living proof that you didn't, and that proof cost him. The Dolph and Gotti beef is one of the most documented rivalries in Memphis rap history, and we have a full breakdown of that on this channel. But for the purposes of understanding what happened to Dolph and understanding the world CEO Jizzle inhabits, the key points are these. Young Dolph survived an assassination attempt in Charlotte, North Carolina in 2017. His SUV was hit by over 100 bullets. 100 bullets. He walked away alive. He then survived another assassination attempt in Hollywood, California later that same year, shot outside the Lowe's Hollywood Hotel. Then in February of 2019, a car pulled up to his mother's house in Memphis and opened fire. Not his house, his mother's house. 3 attempts, 3 different cities. 3 times Young Dolph walked away. He made music about surviving those attempts. He was defiant about it. He wore the survival as a badge. "I've been shot at more times than I can remember" was essentially a lyric he could have written on any day of the week, and it would have been true. The attempts on his life became part of his mythology. The man who simply would not go down no matter what they threw at him. He didn't walk away the 4th time. On November 17, 2021, Young Dolph was in Memphis for his annual Thanksgiving turkey giveaway. Something he had done every year, bringing food to families in South Memphis who needed it. Giving back in the most concrete, direct way imaginable. He stopped at Makita's homemade butter cookies on Airways Boulevard in South Memphis. He went inside. He was shot and killed. He was struck approximately 22 times. He was pronounced dead at the scene. He was 36 years old. The murder of Young Dolph sent shockwaves through Memphis, through hip-hop, through every community that had ever been touched by his music, his generosity, and his presence. For many people in Memphis, especially those close to him, November 17, 2021 was not just the day they lost a rapper. It was the day they lost a brother, a cousin, a friend, a protector, an icon. And in Memphis, when something like that happens to someone of that magnitude, the question of what comes next is never purely a police matter. Now here's where it gets real. Because the investigation into Young Dolph's murder did not resolve cleanly or quickly. It unfolded over years. Years of community grief, years of speculation, years of watching the legal system move at its own pace while the streets moved at theirs. And along the way, it revealed layers of Memphis politics that go all the way from neighborhood corners to Shelby County courtrooms. 3 men were eventually charged in connection with Dolph's murder. Justin Johnson, who raps under the name Straight Drop, was charged as one of the shooters. Cornelius Smith Jr. was charged as the second shooter, and Hernandez Govan was charged as the alleged mastermind who planned and organized the operation. A 4th man, Jamarcus Johnson, pleaded guilty to accessory charges after the fact. He helped after the murder happened, not during. Now let's be precise about the timeline, because the sequence of events here matters enormously for the larger story we're telling. Justin Johnson was arrested in January 2022, about 2 months after the murder, following a months-long investigation. His arrest came after he allegedly tried to flee to Indiana and was tracked down. Cornelius Smith Jr. was later arrested and made the decision to cooperate with prosecutors, agreeing to testify against Johnson in exchange for consideration on his own case. And Hernandez Govan, the alleged architect of the whole operation, was the last major figure to go to trial. When Justin Johnson's trial finally kicked off in September 2024, it dropped a bombshell on the public that the streets had been speculating about for nearly 3 years. Shelby County Deputy District Attorney Paul Hagerman stood up in that courtroom and alleged that Yo Gotti's older brother, Anthony Big Jook Mims, had placed a $100,000 hit on Young Dolph's head. $100,000. That was the price. According to Cornelius Smith's testimony on the stand, Hernandez Govan told both him and Johnson about the bounty. Big Jook allegedly offered the hit as a package deal, cash money plus the opportunity to get signed to CMG Yo Gotti's label. Get Dolph, get signed. That was allegedly the offer. Smith testified that he and Johnson agreed to it. The split, according to his testimony, was $40,000 each for the two shooters and $10,000 for Govan's role in setting it up and coordinating the operation. Both Smith and Johnson gave Govan $10,000 up front as a down payment. The motive that prosecutors laid out was multi-layered, and it is important to understand both layers because they explain a great deal about why this murder happened and why CEO Jizzle's name carries the weight it carries in the aftermath. On one level, the motive was personal. Young Dolph and the CMG camp had been in a very public, very documented, very escalating feud for years. Diss tracks, social media disrespect, real incidents. The kind of friction between two camps in the same city that builds and builds and builds until something breaks. On another level, prosecutors suggested the motive was about power and business, that CMG had at some point wanted young Dolph under their label, wanted to absorb Paper Route Empire, and Dolph had flatly refused. And a man who builds a multi-million-dollar independent empire in your city without your help, without your blessing, and without your infrastructure, that man is a standing rebuke to your power. In Memphis, that kind of rebuke does not always stay in the boardroom. Prosecutors also alleged that Big Jook had placed bounties on artists across all of Paper Route Empire. Not just Dolph, but the entire label's roster. Every PRE artist had allegedly been given a price. The court testimony painted a picture of a calculated, systematic campaign to eliminate competition and consolidate power in Memphis rap. This was not a heat-of-the-moment crime. This was allegedly an organized operation months in the making. On the day of the murder, Smith testified that he and Johnson knew young Dolph would be in South Memphis for the turkey giveaway. They spotted his custom car, which was well known to anyone who followed Memphis rap culture. They followed him to Makita's Cookies. They watched him go inside. They jumped out of the white Mercedes. They opened fire. Justin Johnson was convicted of first-degree murder in 2024. He is now serving time for the killing of young Dolph. Hernandez Govan went to trial in 2025, and here is where the story gets complicated in ways that frustrated a lot of people who had been following the case. After roughly 3 hours of deliberation, the jury acquitted Hernandez Govan on all charges. Not guilty of first-degree murder, not guilty of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Govan walked out of that courtroom a free man. He hugged his attorney, he thanked the judge, and he walked. That verdict was a second shockwave through Memphis, because while the courts had spoken on Justin Johnson, the acquittal of Govan left enormous questions unanswered about who exactly organized what and who exactly gave what orders. The jury heard the case and made their determination. That is how the legal system works. But the streets have their own determination, and the streets' determination is not bound by the same evidentiary standards. And Big Jook himself, the man prosecutors alleged gave the original order, the man prosecutors alleged put up the $100,000, the man whose name was said out loud in a Shelby County courtroom as the person ultimately responsible for young Dolph's death, Anthony Big Jook Mims never saw the inside of a courtroom as a defendant because on January 13, 2024, approximately 9 months before Justin Johnson's trial even began, Big Jook was shot and killed outside Perignon's restaurant and event center on Winchester Road in Memphis. He had attended a funeral earlier that same day. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. He was 47 years old. Memphis police responded to the area around 6385 Winchester Road after an officer heard multiple gunshots at approximately 4:15 in the afternoon. 2 men were found shot. Big Jook was identified as one of them. Police said immediately that they believed the shooting was targeted, that Big Jook was the specific intended victim. A white Ford Explorer without license plates was photographed leaving the scene by a witness and identified as a potential suspect vehicle. A $4,000 reward was offered for information. As of the time of this video, no arrests have been made in the murder of Anthony Big Jook Mims. No suspects have been publicly named by Memphis police. The case has been described as ongoing and active, but in practical terms, it has been cold for over a year. And this is where CEO Jizzle's name enters the conversation with full force. Now let's be absolutely crystal clear about something before we go any further, because this channel does not play fast and loose with facts, and we will not start now. The allegations we're about to break down, the specific allegations that connect CEO Jizzle's name to multiple violent incidents in Memphis, are internet allegations. They are street rumors. They have circulated across social media, rap blogs, online forums, YouTube comment sections, Reddit threads. and hip-hop Discord servers. No law enforcement agency has publicly named CEO Jizzle as a suspect in the death of Big Jook or in any of the other specific incidents attributed to him in the online narrative. What we are doing right now is documenting what the internet said, why people believed it, and why the conversation around his name became as massive as it did. We're breaking down the narrative. We're not confirming it. Are we clear? Good, because the distinction matters. Let's go. After Big Jook was shot and killed on January 13, 2024, the internet moved with the speed that only social media enables. In the hip-hop community, the immediate context was impossible for anyone to ignore. This was Yo Gotti's brother. This was the man who, as would later be alleged in open court, ordered the hit on young Dolph, and he had been shot dead outside a restaurant in Memphis less than 3 years after Dolph's murder. For a community as tight-knit and politically aware as Memphis street culture, that timeline was not going to be treated as coincidence without extensive examination. The online community started digging immediately. Reddit threads on Memphis rap forums lit up within hours. Twitter, or X, whatever we're calling it now, was running hot. YouTube comment sections on every hip-hop channel that posted about Big Jook's death were filling up with speculation. And the name that kept surfacing over and over and over again in thread after thread after thread was CEO Jizzle. No cap. Within 48 hours of Big Jook's death hitting the internet, you could not scroll through a comment section about Memphis rap without seeing his name mentioned in direct connection to the shooting. Clips began circulating. People who claimed to have knowledge of Memphis street politics began speaking on it publicly. Anonymous accounts were dropping what they called inside information. The streets were talking, and they were talking loud, and they were talking about one specific name. The narrative that crystallized online went like this. CEO Jizzle, as young Dolph's cousin, as a member of the extended Paper Route Empire family, had allegedly been on a mission since November 17, 2021. The online community framed him as the one who stepped up, the one who did not just grieve but moved. And Big Jook's death, in the street logic of online commentators, was the most significant alleged example of that movement. But what is critical to understand, and what a lot of the YouTube content and social media posts about this story have skipped over, is how street narratives actually build themselves in the internet age. Because the CEO Jizzle narrative was not built on a single claim. It was not built on one Reddit post or one tweet. It was built through an accumulation of signals over time: social media behavior, music, who he was seen with, how he responded publicly when things went down, what he said on Instagram Live, how he conducted himself in the beef with Big 30, the way the Memphis street community spoke about him, even in coded or indirect ways. In street culture, direct confession is not the currency of reputation. Nobody walks up to a microphone. Information travels through implication, through silence, through what does and does not get denied. And CEO Jizzle, for the most part, did not do much publicly to extinguish the narrative that was being built around his name. In some ways, whether intentionally or not, he fed it. And this brings us to the beef with Big 30, which is one of the few genuinely documented, confirmed, on-the-record conflicts that gives us a concrete window into how CEO Jizzle operates publicly. Big 30, Rodney Lamont Wright Jr., is one of the most prominent Memphis rappers of his generation. He is from the Kill Branch area of Memphis, an area with its own specific political identity in the city's complex street geography. He broke nationally through his collaboration with Pooh Shiesty on the 2021 single Neighbors, which cracked the Billboard Hot 100 and put him on the national radar. Big 30 runs in different circles than Paper Route Empire, different allegiances, different loyalties. And in Memphis, those distinctions are not minor footnotes, they are the entire story. The documented, publicly recorded beef between CEO Jizzle and Big 30 represents one of the clearest windows we have into how Jizzle moves publicly and how he handles conflict in the social media era. Because what happened between them was not subtle, it was not coded, it was right out in the open for anyone who was watching. The situation started when CEO Jizzle got into a public argument with Big 30's younger brother on social media. That kind of back and forth happens constantly in the world of Memphis rap. It's how a lot of beefs begin, in the comment sections and the reply sections, where people say things they might not say in person, but that have real consequences regardless. What took this from ordinary social media beef to something that the entire Memphis rap community took notice of was what Jizzle did next. He publicly dissed Big 30's deceased cousin, a person named Nuki who had died before any of this happened. Going at someone's dead is, in any street context and in any part of the country, the highest level of disrespect available. It is the thing you say when you are not just trying to win an argument. It is the thing you say when you want the other person to know that you have zero regard for them, zero fear of them, and zero concern about what comes next. It is a declaration. It is a declaration. The YouTube documentation of this confrontation exists and was widely circulated at the time. Memphis Street News, one of the most followed accounts tracking Memphis street culture with hundreds of thousands of followers, posted about it. The back and forth between Jizzle and Big 30 became public knowledge across the Memphis rap community and beyond. Big 30 fired back. He clowned Jizzle publicly. The back and forth went multiple rounds, and through all of it, CEO Jizzle did not back down and did not de-escalate. He stayed on it. He kept the energy up. He showed publicly that he was not concerned about the consequences of disrespecting Big 30 and Big 30's circle. Now here is the critical intersection between the documented beef and the larger unconfirmed narrative. The online community that had already been building the CEO Jizzle mythology did not look at the Big 30 beef in isolation. They looked at it as additional evidence. The name Nuki, Big 30's deceased cousin, had surfaced in connection with the broader allegations about Jizzle's alleged activities in Memphis. We are being careful here. No arrest record connects CEO Jizzle to anyone's death. What is confirmed is the public disrespect directed at Big 30 and his circle. What is alleged by the internet, by street commentators, by the forums and comment sections is everything beyond that. But the way the online community read the beef was this: a man who publicly disrespects his ops dead while living through the rumors that the streets have already attached to his name is not a man who is trying to stay off the radar. He is a man who is operating in full view. He is a man who has decided that the narrative around him is accurate enough that hiding from it would be pointless, so he leans into it instead. Whether that reading is accurate or not is a question only CEO Jizzle can fully answer. But it is the reading that the internet made, and it is the reading that made his name even larger in the months that followed. Now here is where this story leaves the realm of online debate and steps directly into documented, confirmed, verifiable reality. Because whatever else you believe or don't believe about CEO Jizzle, what happened on September 7th, 2023 was real. The bullet was real, the blood was real, and the response was real. September 7th, 2023, Memphis, Tennessee. FedEx Forum, the same arena where the Memphis Grizzlies play their home games. Lil Baby is performing his It's Only Us tour, with Glorilla as a supporting act. It is one of the biggest concert nights Memphis had seen in years. Thousands of people are inside, families, fans, people who just want a good night out. By all accounts, it should have been exactly that. Approximately 30 minutes into Lil Baby's set, gunshots ring out inside the arena. Inside the arena, not outside. Not in the parking lot, not on the street, inside a major professional sports and entertainment venue, at a sold-out concert while thousands of people are present. Somebody, and this part is crucial, brought a firearm past security at FedEx Forum. They got it through bag checks, through metal detectors, through every layer of security that a venue of that size has in place. And then they waited. And when the moment was right, they used it. That is not spontaneous. That is planned, that is calculated, that requires coordination and nerve that most people do not have. Whoever tried to take out CEO Jizzle that night did not do it on impulse. They were there specifically for him. Memphis police responded to 191 Beale Street, FedEx Forum's location, shortly before 10:30 p.m. and found a male victim with a gunshot wound. CEO Jizzle had been shot in the chest and abdomen area. He was placed on a stretcher and rushed out of the arena. He was transported to Regional 1 Hospital in critical condition, which in medical terms means his life was considered at immediate risk. The concert was shut down completely. Lil Baby and Glorilla were pulled off stage. Thousands of fans were evacuated. Memphis police began a full investigation into how a weapon had made it inside a secure major venue. Unfortunately, I couldn't perform last night in Memphis, Lil Baby posted to social media the following day. I'ma make sure everybody gets a refund though. But CEO Jizzle was not thinking about refunds. He was not thinking about anything except making it clear from a hospital bed with machines hooked up all around him and bloody bandages across his chest and stomach that whoever had sent those shots had not finished the job and was not going to. Hours after being rushed into emergency care with life-threatening injuries, he went on Instagram Live. He looked directly into the camera, and he said exactly what Memphis was going to expect a man in his position to say. As many of you hoe-ass naz I done took, ain't no way I'ma let a F-boy take me out. He called his body concrete. He told his followers not to pray for him. He said, pray for the ops 10 times harder. Fam. This man was in critical condition after being shot inside a major arena, and his first communication to the public was a threat from a hospital bed. That is not the behavior of someone who is shaken. That is not the behavior of someone who is reconsidering their choices. That is the behavior of someone who has decided exactly who they are and exactly how they are going to conduct themselves, regardless of the circumstances. Whatever you believe about the allegations that surround CEO Jizzle, whatever you think the internet has right or wrong, the Lil Baby concert shooting established something that cannot be disputed. Real people, with real weapons and real intentions, were willing to go to extraordinary lengths to put him in the ground. And he survived it. And he came back louder. Now let's talk about the arrest. 3 weeks after the shooting, following a joint investigation involving the multi-agency gang unit, the gun crimes unit, the ATF task force, and the Shelby County Fugitive Apprehension Team, Memphis police announced the arrest of Kevin Young, a 22-year-old who raps under the name Kato 2X, also known as Kato 2 Times. Here is the detail that made this story even crazier to everyone who was following it. Kevin Young and CEO Jizzle had made music together. Their most recent collaboration, titled Step Brothers 2, had dropped in April of 2023, 5 months before the concert. They had recorded music together, put it out publicly, had their names on the same release, and then, according to law enforcement, one of them showed up at the other's location with a gun and tried to end his life. Memphis police described Kevin Young as a known and documented gang member associated with the Rich and Ruthless gang. He had previously been arrested for first-degree murder back in 2017 and for aggravated assault in 2019. When investigators raided his residence on Duncanshire Road and apprehended him on September 27, 2023, they found multiple firearms, Glocks and semi-automatic rifles, along with ammunition and a significant quantity of marijuana. His bond was set at $150,000. He was charged with reckless endangerment with a deadly weapon, unlawful possession of a weapon, and additional felony weapons charges. Memphis police stated publicly that they believed the shooting was premeditated, not an accident, not random violence, a planned operation carried out inside a secured entertainment venue. And in the street logic that the online community had been applying to CEO Jizzle's story for months, the fact that someone went to that level to try to take him out was itself interpreted as confirmation of the broader narrative. Because in Memphis street logic, the effort someone makes to get at you is a measure of what you have done to them. The harder they come for you, the more they feel you've done. Whether that logic is justice is a separate question, but it is the logic the streets apply. And after September 7th, 2023, no one in Memphis or in the online hip-hop community was treating CEO Jizzle's name as a minor footnote anymore. Now let's be precise about the structural reality of what we are actually dealing with, because this is where a lot of commentary on CEO Jizzle, including a significant amount of the YouTube and social media coverage that exists, tends to blur lines in ways that are not responsible and that create real danger for real people. Here is what is confirmed, documented, and verifiable through public records, news coverage, and court proceedings. 1. CEO Jizzle, Jalen Johnson, is the cousin of Young Dolph. Confirmed by multiple credible outlets including TMZ, All Hip Hop, XXL, and others. 2. Young Dolph was murdered on November 17, 2021 in Memphis, Tennessee. Justin Johnson was convicted of first-degree murder in 2024. Cornelius Smith Jr. has admitted to being one of the 2 shooters and testified in Johnson's trial. Prosecutors alleged in open court that Big Jook placed a $100,000 hit on Dolph. 3. Big Jook, Anthony Mims, was shot and killed on January 13, 2024 outside Perignon's restaurant in Memphis. As of 2025, no suspects have been publicly named. No arrests have been made. The case remains open. 4. CEO Jizzle was shot in critical condition at the Lil Baby concert at FedEx Forum on September 7, 2023. Kevin Young was arrested, charged, and connected to the shooting. 5. CEO Jizzle publicly dissed Big 30 and Big 30's deceased cousin Nuki on social media, documented and reported by Memphis Street News and captured on YouTube. 6. CEO Jizzle was reportedly arrested by U.S. Marshals, though the specific charges in that arrest have not been comprehensively detailed in public reporting we have been able to verify. Here is what is not confirmed. The specific allegation that CEO Jizzle was responsible for Big Jook's death has not been supported by any public arrest record, any indictment, or any criminal charge as of the time of this video. The broader allegations that circulate online about him being responsible for the deaths of other named individuals in Memphis have similarly not been confirmed by any law enforcement agency in any public document. What we have is the internet's case, and the internet's case rests on proximity to motive. Public behavior the online community reads as confirmation, social media activity that is interpreted as coded communication, and the core street logic principle that says when someone significant gets hit in Memphis and the person with the clearest motive is still breathing, that person knows something about what happened. Is that proof in a court of law? No, not even close. Is it enough to build a massive online mythology around a person's name? Apparently, in this era, yes, because CEO Jizzle's name has become inseparable from the broader story of what Memphis looks like after Young Dolph's death, regardless of what any court has determined. And that gap between what the courts have determined and what the streets have determined is one of the most important things to understand about how this city works, how this culture works, and how the internet has changed both forever. Let's go even deeper into the legal record because the Young Dolph murder trial and the trials surrounding it, gave the public more concrete information about the internal politics of Memphis rap than almost anything that had come before. And a lot of people know pieces of this story, but not the full picture. Let's put the full picture together. When Justin Johnson's trial began in Shelby County in September 2024, the proceedings were attended closely by press, by the Memphis community, by hip-hop media, and by people across the country who had followed Young Dolph's story for years. Cornelius Smith Jr. was the star witness. Smith, who had admitted to being one of the two shooters at Makita's Cookies, was testifying against his alleged co-shooter in hopes of favorable consideration on his own charges, and the picture he painted on the stand was extraordinary in its detail. Smith told the courtroom that Hernandez Govan, described by prosecutors as the mastermind of the operation, had come to him and Johnson with a business proposition. Govan told them Big Jook had put a $100,000 price on Young Dolph's head. The money was to be split, $40,000 each for the two shooters, $10,000 to Govan for his role in the coordination. Smith and Johnson each paid Govan $10,000 up front as a down payment from funds they had already received. The prosecution's narrative about motive was layered and specific. The long-running public beef between Young Dolph and the CMG camp, years of diss tracks, social media back and forth, real incidents, provided the emotional backdrop. But prosecutors argued there was also a business dimension, that CMG had at some point sought to have Young Dolph under their umbrella, and that Dolph's refusal had made him an obstacle. A prosecutor told the jury at Johnson's trial that CMG wanted Young Dolph to work for them, but that he turned them down. The prosecution also argued that the bounties extended beyond Dolph himself, that Big Jook had allegedly placed smaller bounties on every artist in the Paper Route Empire roster. The entire label was allegedly marked. Smith testified that he did not originally know about Paper Route being targeted until Govan told him about it. The specific sequence of November 17, 2021 is laid out through Smith's testimony. They had advanced knowledge that Dolph would be in Memphis for the Thanksgiving giveaway. They knew his car, custom and recognizable. They spotted it. They followed him to Makita's Cookies. They watched him go inside. They got out. They opened fire. After the murder, according to Smith's testimony, Johnson FaceTimed Big Jook to confirm the job was done. Justin Johnson was convicted. He is now incarcerated for the first-degree murder of Young Dolph. Hernandez Govan went to trial in 2025 and was acquitted after 3 hours of jury deliberation. Not guilty. He walked free. That outcome left a lot of questions unanswered for the public and for the Memphis community specifically. And Big Jook, the alleged architect, the man prosecutors named as the person who put up the money and gave the order, never faced a jury. He was shot dead in January 2024, nearly 9 months before Johnson's trial even began. For the people of Memphis who had been watching all of this, the timing of Big Jook's death was not something anyone was treating as random coincidence. He died before the trial. He died before his role in the murder was stated publicly in a Shelby County courtroom. He died before any legal accountability was even possible. Whether that timing was connected to anything or was purely circumstantial, the internet and a significant section of the street community had already made its judgment, and CEO Jizzle's name was right in the middle of that judgment. In the months following Big Juke's murder in January 2024, the phrase that attached itself most firmly to the CEO Jizzle narrative online was "slide for Dolph." And it is worth taking a minute to unpack what that phrase means and why it resonated so deeply with such a large online audience. To slide in Memphis street culture, and in street culture more broadly, is to go handle something. It means you are moving. It means you are not just talking. It means you have made a decision and you are executing on it. The phrase "slide for Dolph" in the context of the online discussion about CEO Jizzle carried a very specific implication that someone in Dolph's circle, with Dolph's family connection and Dolph's motivation, had decided that grief without consequence was not going to be the ending of this story. The Historica Fandom Wiki, which is user-generated and therefore not journalistically verified but is significant as a document of the scale of the online narrative, has an entry on CEO Jizzle describing the Lil Baby concert shooting as taking place during what it characterizes as a "slide for Dolph" gang war. We cite this not as a verified source but as evidence of something important. The narrative about CEO Jizzle has become large enough and persistent enough in online spaces that people have gone to the effort of building reference documentation around it. This is what happens when a street story reaches critical mass in the internet age. It starts getting archived. It starts being treated as history before it is even fully finished. The appeal of the "slide for Dolph" narrative is not hard to understand if you know anything about hip-hop culture and the value it places on loyalty, the ride or die, the one who does not just mourn but moves, the one who makes the ops feel it. In every era of hip-hop, from the East Coast West Coast era to the drill era, the figure who steps up when someone they love gets taken has always been one of the most mythologized figures in the culture. Whether we're talking about stories that were real, stories that were half real, or stories that were entirely constructed, the mythology of the Avenger has deep roots in hip-hop. When the internet decided CEO Jizzle was that figure in the Young Dolph story, it was not making a purely rational claim. It was fulfilling a narrative need. It was telling the story of loyalty and consequence that the culture has always wanted to tell. And because the actual facts of Big Juke's murder remain unresolved, no arrests, no named suspects, and open investigation, there is nothing in the confirmed record to contradict the narrative. The absence of official resolution leaves space for the street's version to fill the void. Here's the big picture, fam. This is where we zoom out to the full view. Young Dolph's murder in November 2021 did not just take a man from his family and his city. It created a vacuum in Memphis rap that nobody has fully filled and that may never be fully filled. Paper Route Empire still exists. Key Glock is still active and has been remarkably productive in the aftermath, channeling his grief into music that has connected deeply with his audience. But the weight of losing Dolph, the creative vision, the business mind, the spiritual center of what PRE was, is permanent. The label carries on, but it carries a loss that does not get smaller with time. In that vacuum, the question of accountability became one of the most consuming questions in the Memphis street community. Not just legal accountability, though that was eventually coming through the court system, slowly, imperfectly, but street accountability, the kind that operates outside of courtrooms and evidentiary standards, the kind that moves on its own timeline according to its own logic and delivers its own verdicts. Big Juke's death in January 2024 was read by the online community as that accountability arriving. Whether it was or was not, legally speaking, remains undetermined. But culturally, the narrative that was built around it was powerful enough to transform CEO Jizzle from a locally known rapper with a famous cousin into one of the most discussed names in contemporary Memphis rap culture. Now here is where we have to be honest about something that is uncomfortable but real. When a person's name gets attached online to acts of violence, regardless of whether those acts can be proven, the consequences are real. They become targets. They become objects of potential retaliation from people who accept the online narrative and decide to respond to it. The attempted hit on CEO Jizzle at the Lil Baby concert, where someone smuggled a weapon into a secured venue specifically to end his life, is the clearest possible evidence that whatever is happening around his name is not simply a matter of internet debate. Real people believe something serious enough to take extraordinarily dangerous action. And CEO Jizzle survived it, responded to it with defiance, and continued operating publicly in a way that did not reduce the temperature around his name at all. We would be doing this story incomplete justice if we only documented the allegations and never talked about the music. The fact that this collaboration came out in April 2023 and the Lil Baby concert shooting allegedly involving Young happened in September 2023 is the kind of detail that hip-hop historians and online forensic analysts have been picking through ever since. In a city and a culture where trust is currency, the allegation that your musical collaborator tried to end your life represents a specific kind of betrayal that Memphis rap fans know all too well from other stories in the genre's history. His track, True Story, by title alone, communicates something important about how CEO Jizzle presents himself publicly. In the Memphis context, True Story is not just a song name. It is a statement of authenticity. It is the declaration that what he is rapping about is not performance, is not character, is not constructed narrative for commercial purposes. It is testimony. It is claiming that the story he tells about himself and his life is real. Whether his music career eventually breaks through to the commercial level that his background and his reputation suggest is possible, whether he steps from under the shadow of his cousin's massive legacy and establishes himself as a major artist in his own right, remains to be seen. The interruptions that street life has imposed on his career have been significant and ongoing. But the music exists, the intention exists, and in the full picture of who CEO Jizzle is, that intention matters. We cannot complete this story without spending real time with the man at its center, because without young Dolph, there is no CEO Jizzle story to tell. Without Dolph, none of this exists in the form that it exists. Adolph Robert Thornton Jr. was something genuinely rare in hip-hop, an artist whose music, business acumen, community presence, and personal integrity were all consistently aligned. He rapped about his real life. He built his label his real way. He gave back to his community in real, material, tangible ways, not through carefully staged charitable moments designed for press, but through things like showing up every Thanksgiving with turkeys for families who needed them. He was beloved not just as an entertainer, but as a person who had chosen to use his success to take care of the community he came from. He was a father of 2 children. He was the partner of Mia J., who has since dedicated herself to continuing his legacy through the Paper Route Foundation. He was the cousin and creative partner of Key Glock. He was the cousin of CEO Jizzle. He was connected to Juice WRLD as a second cousin, a detail that speaks to the breadth of his family tree within hip-hop. He was a man with deep roots and deep relationships. When he was killed at 36 years old on his way to give turkeys to families in South Memphis, the grief that followed was unlike anything Memphis had experienced in recent memory. Murals went up across the city. Vigils drew thousands. Key Glock released his grief album, Glaucoma, one of the most raw, emotionally direct albums to come out of Memphis in years. Mia J. spoke publicly about raising their children without him. The community wrapped around his family, and the city declared a day in his honor. That is the loss that CEO Jizzle is living inside of. That is the grief that he has had to navigate while also navigating the street politics of a city that does not pause for grief, while also being targeted, literally shot, by people who believe the narrative about him strongly enough to act on it, while also maintaining a public profile and continuing to make music and conduct himself in the manner that he has chosen to conduct himself. That weight is real, and whatever choices CEO Jizzle has made, whatever the truth of the allegations surrounding his name, they have to be understood against the backdrop of that weight. Against the backdrop of losing a cousin who was not just family but was an icon in one of the most brutal and public ways imaginable, while the entire world watched and the entire city grieved. Memphis does not give you space to process that quietly. It does not offer that option. And the decisions made in grief, especially in a city where the streets are always presenting choices, are often the decisions that define the rest of a person's story. Let's pull all the way back now, because the CEO Jizzle story is not just a Memphis story. It is a story about the era we live in and what the internet has done to the relationship between street culture and public narrative. Before the internet, a street reputation was bounded by geography. If you had a name in Memphis, that name traveled at the speed of word of mouth, which meant it reached people who were connected through physical proximity, through real relationships, through the specific social network of one city. Your reputation might get told in a song, and if the song spread, your reputation might spread with it, but it spread slowly through the physical distribution of music and the conversations that followed. The internet eliminated all of that friction. Today, a reputation that would have taken years to build and would have stayed local can go global in 48 hours. A YouTube video, a Reddit thread, a Twitter post, a comment section. The reach is instantaneous and the permanence is absolute. Everything posted online is essentially forever, accessible to anyone, anywhere, at any time. What this means for someone like CEO Jizzle is that the narrative the internet built around his name did not stay in Memphis. It reached people in Atlanta, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, in London, in Lagos, people who had never met him and never would, people who had no first-hand knowledge of any of the situations involved, formed strong opinions about who he is and what he has done, based entirely on online content. And some of those people have enemies of his, and the internet made it easy for those enemies to find out who he is, where he's been, and what people are saying about him. The Lil Baby concert shooting was, in a very real sense, partly a product of this dynamic. CEO Jizzle's name was known enough, the narrative around him was established enough, that whoever tried to take him out that night was not operating with limited information. The internet had done the work of making him visible. This is the double edge of the internet reputation in the drill era. It builds you up and it marks you. It gives you credibility and it gives your enemies coordinates. And for artists operating at the intersection of rap culture and street culture, which describes a significant portion of Memphis rap as a genre, that double edge is something that has to be navigated every single day. Some artists try to manage it by going quiet online, by controlling their digital footprint, by stepping back from the narrative. CEO Jizzle has not been that artist. His public persona has been fully present, fully confrontational, and fully consistent with the narrative the internet built around him. Whether that is a strategic choice or simply an authentic expression of who he is, only he knows. But the result is a public profile that remains one of the most controversial and debated in Memphis rap. All right, fam, let's bring it home. Let's account for every thread in this story and tell you where things stand as of the time we're making this video. On the legal side of Young Dolph's murder, Justin Johnson, straight drop, is convicted of first-degree murder and is serving his sentence. Cornelius Smith Jr., who admitted to being one of the shooters and cooperated with the prosecution, has his own legal fate still working its way through the system. Hernandez Govan was acquitted in 2025 and is free. Jamarcus Johnson pleaded guilty to accessory charges. Big Jook, the man prosecutors alleged ordered the hit, is dead. His murder case is open and cold. On CEO Jizzle directly, Kevin Young, Kato 2X, was arrested and charged in connection with the Lil Baby concert shooting. CEO Jizzle survived and made his position clear from a hospital bed. He was subsequently reported to have been arrested by U.S. Marshals, though the comprehensive details of those charges have not been publicly established in the records we have reviewed. His music career has continued to move forward in the midst of all of this, though the street situation has consistently competed with the music for the spotlight. On the broader Memphis landscape, Paper Route Empire continues to operate. Key Glock continues to release music and carry the PRE brand forward. The Young Dolph murder case, despite the convictions and the acquittals, has left questions unanswered that the streets continue to debate. And the online community that built the CEO Jizzle narrative continues to add to it with every new development in Memphis rap culture. On the cultural side, the CEO Jizzle story is not finished. He is a young man navigating one of the most dangerous environments in American street culture, carrying the weight of a legendary cousin's murder, operating in a city with deep and complicated politics in an era where everything is documented and nothing is private. What comes next is unknown, but whatever comes next, the name CEO Jizzle will be in the conversation. Let's end with the real fam, because that is what this channel is about. Young Dolph built something extraordinary. He built it from scratch in one of the most economically disadvantaged cities in America, without compromise, without permission, without bowing to anyone who tried to make him small. He proved that independence was not just a value, it was a viable business strategy. He proved that you could own your music, run your own label, fill your own shows, and feed your own family without signing your life away to anyone. He proved it in Memphis, which meant he proved it in one of the hardest places possible to prove it. And then he was taken, in a cookie shop, on his way to give turkeys to people who needed them. At 36 years old, by an operation that, according to prosecutors, was driven by greed and the inability of certain people to tolerate his refusal to be controlled. The aftermath of that loss, the grief, the legal proceedings, the street responses, the online mythology, all of it, is the world CEO Jizzle has been living in since November 17, 2021. His name has become the central figure in the narrative that the streets and the internet built about what happened after Dolph was gone. The alleged avenger, the one who allegedly did not just mourn, the one who, if the streets are to be believed, made the ops feel it. Is he everything the internet says he is? The confirmed record does not tell us that. No arrests for the specific acts, no charges, no courtroom testimony that puts his name at the center of a verdict. The legal system has not confirmed the narrative. Is he nothing? The bullet he survived at FedEx Forum says otherwise. The documented beefs say otherwise. The fact that someone went to extraordinary lengths to smuggle a weapon into a secured venue and try to end his life says otherwise. The fact that his name has become one of the most discussed names in Memphis rap culture, not because of his music, but because of who the streets believe him to be, says otherwise. What the CEO Jizzle story really tells us is something important about grief and loyalty and consequence in the way that hip-hop culture has always processed these things publicly. It tells us about what happens in a city when a legend is taken and the people who loved him have to decide what the response looks like. It tells us about the power of online narrative in an era when the internet is the streets. And it tells us about a young man, Jalen Johnson, who has had to navigate all of this while also simply trying to exist in a city that never makes existing simple. Young Dolph deserved better. His children deserve their father. His family deserves to have him back. The cookies he was buying that day at Makita's should not have been the last thing he did. And the community he showed up for every Thanksgiving should not have had to bury him. None of that can be changed. But the story of what came after, what was built in his name and in his memory, what choices were made, what myths were constructed, what consequences were allegedly delivered, that is the part that Memphis is still writing. And CEO Jizzle's name will be in that story for a very long time. That's the full breakdown, fam. If you made it to the end of this video, no cap, you are a real one. Drop a comment below. Tell me what you believe. Tell me what part of this hit different for you. Tell me who you want us to break down next. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed, because we are not done. Not even close. We have documentaries, breakdowns, and deep investigations dropping every week on this channel. Rest in peace, young Dolph. Paper route forever. There is a conversation that needs to happen every time a story like this one gets documented. And it is not a comfortable conversation, but it is a necessary one. Because what the CEO Jizzle story represents is not unique to him and not unique to Memphis. It is a pattern. It is a cycle. And the cycle has been spinning in city after city, generation after generation in American hip-hop culture for decades. Let's talk about it. Memphis has produced some of the most talented, creative, charismatic artists in the history of hip-hop. That is not hyperbole. The influence of Memphis on trap music, on drill, on the entire aesthetic of Southern rap has been enormous and frequently uncredited. The dark, atmospheric production style that 3-6 Mafia pioneered in the 1990s, the use of heavy synths, minor key melodies, repetitive hypnotic loops, is the direct ancestor of a significant portion of what you hear in mainstream rap today. The Memphis rap tradition is one of the most original and influential traditions in the genre's history. And yet, Memphis also consistently loses its most promising artists to violence. It lost DJ Screw's influence before it could fully develop. It lost Young Buck to prison time and personal chaos. It lost Black Youngsta, who survived attempts that seemed unsurvivable. It lost Young Dolph to a murder that shook the entire country. It nearly lost CEO Jizzle to a bullet inside an arena. It lost Casino Jizzle, a different Memphis rapper not to be confused with CEO Jizzle, to a 4th of July murder in 2023. The question of why this keeps happening is one that goes far beyond any individual artist or any individual beef. It requires talking about what Memphis actually is structurally. It is one of the poorest major cities in the United States by median household income. It has consistently ranked among the highest in the country for violent crime. Its public school system has been chronically underfunded. Its neighborhoods in the South and North, the same neighborhoods that produce the artists we've talked about in this video, have been systematically denied the investment and infrastructure that would give young people real options. When rap is the most viable path to financial stability that many young men in those neighborhoods can see, and when the streets are the social structure that those young men are embedded in from childhood, the collision between music and violence is not a matter of individual moral failure. It is a structural outcome. None of that excuses individual choices. People have agency, people make decisions, and the decisions people make in Memphis street culture carry life or death consequences. But to look at the CEO Jizzle story, or the Young Dolph story, or the story of any Memphis artist whose life has been touched by violence, and reduce it to individual choices without talking about the context those choices happen in, is to miss the most important part of the story. Young Dolph understood this, by the way. He talked about it in interviews. He talked about why he gave back to South Memphis, why he showed up every Thanksgiving, why he donated to his old school. He understood that the system had failed the neighborhood that made him, and he believed that the people who made it out had an obligation to do something about that. He lived that belief in tangible ways until the day he was taken. And CEO Jizzle, whatever his story ultimately is, whatever the confirmed or unconfirmed truth of the allegations around him, is also a product of that system. A young man from Memphis who lost his cousin to a murder that grew out of the same structures, the same politics, the same cycles that have been taking people from that city for generations. The story of CEO Jizzle is a Memphis story, and the Memphis story is an American story. And until the structural realities that produce these cycles are addressed, the poverty, the disinvestment, the lack of opportunity, the failure of institutions to serve the communities they are supposed to serve, the cycles will continue. The names will change, the specifics will change, but the pattern will hold. That's not pessimism, that's honesty. And on this channel, we do not deal in anything else. Memphis rap is at a crossroads right now, and the CEO Jizzle story is one of the clearest illustrations of why. On one side, there is the commercial momentum. Memphis rap has never been more globally influential than it is right now. The aesthetic that Memphis built, the dark production, the street authenticity, the unflinching subject matter, is all over mainstream hip-hop. Artists from other cities openly cite Memphis influences. The Memphis sound has become a global sound. Key Glock, Big 30, Glorilla, artists connected to Memphis in various ways are moving units, selling out shows, and building real careers. On the other side, there is the violence. The beefs, the cycles, the situations where careers get interrupted, where artists get shot at concerts, where the same streets that produce the music keep trying to take the artists back, where the story of a rapper becomes inseparable from the allegations and incidents that follow his name. CEO Jizzle sits right at that crossroads. A rapper who might, under different circumstances, have built a meaningful career on the strength of his music, on the platform that his family connection and his talent could have provided. A rapper who instead became famous, or infamous, depending on who you ask, primarily because of what the internet alleges about his role in the aftermath of his cousin's murder. A rapper who has now survived being shot in critical condition and who continues to operate publicly in a way that suggests he is not interested in stepping back from the narrative that surrounds him. What happens to CEO Jizzle next matters, not just for him personally, but for what it says about whether the cycle in Memphis rap can be interrupted. Whether an artist in his position can redirect, can use the platform that his notoriety has given him to build something that lasts. Whether Memphis, which has given so much to hip-hop culture, can find a way to protect its own. That is the question this story leaves us with, and it is a question that only time and Memphis can answer. What we know for certain is this: the story is not over. CEO Jizzle is still here. The cases around him are still moving. The city is still watching, and this channel will be documenting every development as it comes. Paper Route forever. Rest in peace, Young Dolph. And stay locked into this channel, because Memphis is not done writing its story, and neither are we. Before we fully close out, there is one more thing worth saying directly to whoever is watching this video right now. Whether you came here because you know Memphis inside and out, or because you stumbled on CEO Jizzle's name in a comment section and went looking for answers, or because you've been following the Young Dolph story since November 2021 and you're trying to understand everything that happened after. The reason this channel exists is because stories like this one deserve serious, thorough, honest treatment. There is a version of this content that would present every allegation about CEO Jizzle as confirmed fact. That would name names and describe acts as settled when they are not legally settled. That would give you the drama without the responsibility. That version of this content is everywhere online. You can find it in 2 minutes. It gets views, it gets shares, and it also contributes to a cycle where unverified information about real people with real lives travels at the speed of the internet and has real consequences. That is not what this channel does. We give you the full picture. We tell you what is confirmed, what is alleged, and why the distinction between the two matters. We document the narrative the streets built while being honest about the foundation that narrative rests on. We respect your intelligence enough to give you the information and let you form your own conclusions. The CEO Jizzle story, with all its layers, all its confirmed facts, all its unconfirmed allegations, all its Memphis context and hip-hop history, deserves that treatment. And so do you. So thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. And stay locked in, because Memphis is always moving, and this channel is always watching.
Two rappers from Jacksonville called themselves the Murder Twins, and by the time the state of Florida was done with them, one had 10 years and the other had 7. No cap. Y&R Mookie and Y&R Slugger T weren't blood brothers. They weren't even related, but they moved so identical that the streets and eventually a courtroom full of prosecutors couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Two Tylers, Tyler Jackson and Tyler Simmons, same first name, same neighborhood, same gang, same gun charges, same judge, same word convicted stamped on their names, 4 months apart in 2022. For real. You couldn't write this if you tried. This is the story of how two dudes from the Arlington side of Jacksonville, Florida, a strip of the city most people outside the 904 never think twice about, built a name off pure chaos, turned the beef with a rival gang into some of the most quoted rap lyrics in this city's history, and then watched the same music that made them famous get played back to a jury as evidence against them. Slugger T just came home. Mookie is still waiting on his number to get called, and the beef that started this whole thing never really ended. It just moved from the block to the courtroom to the internet, where it's still running today. Let's break it down for you from the jump. Before we even get into Mookie and Slugger T directly, you gotta understand the city that made them, because Jacksonville is not a place that comes up when people talk about hip-hop hotbeds. This is a city known for beaches, for the Jaguars, for being the biggest city by landmass in the continental United States. Nobody was checking for Jacksonville right before this era. But somewhere in the mid to late 2010s, a version of drill music came out of Jacksonville that didn't sound like anywhere else. And it hit different because it wasn't performance, it was closer to a live broadcast from streets that were actually at war. The reason Jacksonville drill blew up the way it did is the same reason it eventually became a national controversy: authenticity. When Youngeen Ace made a song about surviving a shooting that killed his brother, that pain in his voice was real, not written for a bar. When Foolio made records that sounded like a man who already accepted death was closing in on him, that wasn't a character, that was his actual daily reality. That's the soil Y&R, Mookie, and Slugger T grew out of. Two rival umbrellas, ATK on one side, KTA on the other, turned neighborhood loyalty into a citywide rap war, and every young artist coming up in that era, whether they wanted to or not, got pulled into picking a side. Two dudes from Arlington were about to become part of that story, but to understand how they got there, we gotta go back further than the block party, further than the first diss track. We gotta go back to who they were before any of this started. To really get why Y and R and the Murder Twins mattered, you have to go back to the two names that towered over Jacksonville's entire scene: Youngeen Ace and Julio Foolio. Ace, born Keonta Bullard, fronted the ATK gang, a name Jacksonville police have said stood for Ace's top killers. Foolio, born Charles Jones, repped the 6-block set under the KTA umbrella, a name widely understood in the streets and reported by multiple outlets to stand for Kill Them All. Foolio grew up in the Moncrief neighborhood, and his own father had been murdered in a Jacksonville shooting back in 2011. So before Foolio ever picked up a mic, violence had already taken somebody from him. Ace's own upbringing wasn't much softer. Born in East Chicago, Indiana, he relocated to Jacksonville's west side as a kid, one of 12 brothers being raised by a single mother in a house with almost no resources, describing his own city in interviews as a jungle where nobody was looking out for him but himself. Y&R fell under that same KTA umbrella that Foolio repped, which is exactly why Mookie and Slugger T were cool with Foolio or Spot Him Got Him, and exactly why their beef ran through the same channel as Ace's ATK crew. This wasn't 3 or 4 separate rap beefs happening in the same city by coincidence. It was largely one long-running war with multiple fronts, and Y&R's conflict with Ace was one piece of a much bigger, much deadlier picture. That bigger picture starts in May of 2017, when Foolio's 18-year-old cousin Zion Brown was shot and killed inside his own home in what's been widely reported as a drive-by style attack. Reports describe someone throwing a brick through the sliding glass door before opening fire, killing Zion and wounding his 2 younger sisters in the process. A young man with reported ties to Ace's camp was later arrested in connection with the killing. Ace himself was never charged in Zion's death, but the suspicion alone was enough to pour gasoline on a fire that was already burning between the two camps, and it's the moment most people point to as the real start of the deadly phase of this rivalry. A year later, in June of 2018, that fire came back around on Ace, Quan, and two close friends known by their street names, 23 and 4, at a restaurant near the St. Johnstown Center in Jacksonville. As they drove away, their car was riddled with bullets. Ace's brother and both his friends were killed. Ace was shot a total of 8 times in that attack, and he survived only because none of the bullets struck a major organ. No arrests were ever made in that shooting, but it was widely believed on the streets to be retaliation tied to the Zion Brown killing, and reports at the time pointed to 6 Block Fulio's own set as the group responsible. Fulio never let that die down quietly either. Years later, he was photographed posing with his crew at Royale Smith's gravesite in what was clearly meant as a disrespect, and Ace's camp responded exactly how you'd expect, with public vows of payback all over social media. While he was still recovering in the hospital, Ace was arrested for a probation violation after a gun store clerk recognized him from news coverage and told police Ace and his friends had been in the shop earlier that same day, holding weapons on surveillance footage. Ace was already a convicted felon at that point. Back in 2017, he'd been a getaway driver in a robbery alongside a man named DeAndre Thomas. The same DeAndre Thomas, also known as Trey Shorty, who would later be arrested in connection with the killing of Fulio's cousin Zion Brown. During that 2017 robbery, a gun discharged that nearly struck a 12-month-old child who was present. Ace did roughly a year in jail for his role as the getaway driver and was given 31 months of probation, which is exactly the probation the gun store sighting put him in violation of. Fulio's own family paid a price too. In February of 2019, his 16-year-old brother, a young rapper who went by Bibby, whose real name was Adrian Gaynor Jr., was shot and killed at a Jacksonville apartment complex then known as Hilltop Village. According to an arrest warrant that surfaced years later, investigators recovered 45 shell cases from the scene, and prosecutors say the shooter chased the teenager through the complex before firing at close range. The case sat unsolved and simmering in the streets for years, feeding directly into the war before ATK-affiliated rapper Ksu, real name Hakeem Robinson, was eventually tied to the killing. Ksu had reportedly already put the names of fallen KTA members on one of his own album covers years before that arrest, using the tragedy as content the same way this entire war used every death as content. By 2021, the wider ATK-KTA beef had gone fully viral and fully national, with Ace's record Who I Smoke naming dead KTA affiliates over an upbeat pop sample and racking up over 18 million views, and Fulio firing back almost immediately with the When I See You remix, a video built over an R&B love song where he printed out an actual banner made from local news coverage of the Wasabi shooting, showing the faces of Quan, 23, and 4, and danced around a cemetery with it. An image so cold it became one of the most talked about drill videos to ever come out of Florida. That exact video and that exact imagery is what Mookie and other Y&R affiliates borrowed from when they made their own tracks. Referencing the Wasabi shooting, this whole scene was recycling grief into content back and forth for years. This is the war Mookie and Slugger T's own beef with Ace was nested inside of. It wasn't two guys from two random crews going at it in a vacuum. It was one small conflict inside a much larger, much bloodier citywide gang war that eventually put multiple young men behind bars for life and turned Jacksonville into one of the most closely watched drill scenes in the entire country. Now, to really understand this, let's rewind to before any of the shootouts, before any of the viral videos, before either one of them had a rap name that meant anything outside of Jacksonville. Tyler Jackson and Tyler Simmons were just two kids from the same part of the city trying to find their footing. Jackson grew up in the Arlington neighborhood, which the locals call A Block, on the east side of Jacksonville. Simmons came up around the same circles, eventually becoming known on the block and later in the music as Slugger T. According to reporting that surfaced during his court proceedings, Simmons and the rest of the Y&R crew, which stands for Young and Reckless, sometimes referred to as Young and Ruthless depending on who's telling the story, first connected the way a lot of young dudes in that part of Jacksonville connect, through football, playing ball on the same fields, running with the same age group, building the kind of loyalty that street culture in Jacksonville takes and turns into something a lot heavier once guns and gangs get involved. Y&R wasn't just a rap crew, it was a set, and it fell under that same KTA umbrella that produced Foolio and Spot 'em Got 'em. Their biggest rivals were the ATK gang, led in the public eye by Young G and Ace, and that KTA versus ATK divide is the backdrop every single thing about Mookie and Slugger T's story sits on top of. Slugger T earned his stripes the hard way. Visually, he doesn't necessarily match the stereotype fans might expect from one of Y&R's main shooters. Slick back hair, a mouthful of gold teeth, tattoos running up his arms, a look that could almost pass for laid back. But according to people who knew him coming up, that appearance never matched the reality of who he was on the street. He built a reputation as somebody who could handle himself in a fight before he ever built a reputation as a rapper. And over time, that reputation turned him into one of the set's shooters. Somebody the crew trusted to hold it down when things got physical. There's also a detail about his family background that a lot of casual fans don't know. On his mother's side, Slugger T's step-grandfather was reportedly tied to the Colombo crime family, one of the 5 families that ran organized crime in New York. And that same relative was connected to the infamous McDonald's Monopoly scam, the multi-million-dollar fraud case that got a whole HBO documentary made about it years later. Slugger T came into this world with a bloodline already tangled up in a certain kind of lifestyle. Jackson and Simmons became so close, so inseparable, that eventually they gave themselves a name that stuck harder than either of their government names ever could: the Murder Twins. Not because they were blood, not because they looked alike, but because when you saw one, you saw the other. And because their whole approach to the game, the music, the loyalty, the willingness to ride for each other, moved in lockstep. In 2020, they made it official and dropped a track literally titled Murder Twins. That song is the single biggest reason casual rap fans outside Jacksonville ever heard their names. And it's the moment the nickname stopped being a street thing between two homies and became a brand. A brand that, per reporting at the time, pulled in over 4.5 million views on YouTube alone. This is where things started getting real. To understand how Mookie and Slugger T blew up, you gotta understand the beef that gave their music its edge. And that beef traces back to a block party that, depending on who you ask, changed the entire direction of their careers. According to accounts that circulated in the years after, the tension between Y&R and Ace's ATK allegedly ignited at a block party where a fight broke out between the two groups. That fight turned into a shootout. Jackson, aka Mookie, was reportedly grazed by a bullet during the exchange, and Slugger T fired back in the chaos. Street rumors at the time claimed Ace himself was the one who pulled the trigger that hit Mookie, though that was never confirmed by any official source. What is confirmed is that after that party, Mookie and Ace started going at each other directly in their music, trading disses back and forth, and that block party shootout is widely viewed as the spark that turned a rivalry into a war. Mookie referenced that exact night directly on his track, Dead Ops, describing getting hit by a stray while Slugger T returned fire to cover him, and naming his friend Jabray Cook, known as Bree, another Y&R member who was there with them at night. On the other side, ATK-affiliated rapper Kasu put his own version of that same night into a track called Bang It Out, taunting Y&R directly and referencing the shootout from his own perspective, going as far as having someone in the video tear up a Uno card marked with the number 6. A direct symbolic dig at Foolio's 6 Block affiliation. Kasu also took to Instagram Live at one point to talk down on the Y&R camp, invoking Foolio's late brother and mocking Slugger T's appearance, comparing him unfavorably to a viral internet personality. Slugger T, never wanting to sit quiet, responded on his own live stream to make it clear he wasn't rattled. Kasu's role in this exact exchange reads different in hindsight now that we know where his story ended up. A man mocking Y&R over a beef with lyrics years before his own lyrics and social media posts would help put him away for life, twice over. From there, the back and forth between KTA's Y&R affiliates and Ace's ATK crew stopped being limited to music videos and Instagram posts. It spilled into real minor shootouts on the ground in Jacksonville, feeding directly into the same larger war Foolio and Ace were already fighting over Zion Brown and everything that followed. Little did anybody involved know at the time, but the videos and Instagram lives everyone was using to score points off each other would eventually end up as court exhibits. The most devastating chapter in this entire saga didn't even directly involve Mookie or Slugger T pulling the trigger. It involved their rival, One-Gin Ace, almost losing his life in that same June 2018 shooting that had already become a citywide flashpoint. The Wasabi shooting was never officially tied to a specific shooter in the information that's publicly available, but the timing and the rivalry made it impossible for the streets not to connect it to the ongoing KTA-ATK war, and Mookie and Foolio both referenced the tragedy in diss tracks aimed at Ace afterward, using imagery tied directly to the incident to twist the knife. That's the level this beef had reached. A shooting that left 3 people dead and Ace fighting for his life became fuel for more disses, more tension, more escalation on both sides. By the time Mookie's own legal troubles caught up to him, the war between these camps had already produced years of shootings, retaliations, and diss tracks turning real tragedy into content, and Mookie and Slugger T's entire recorded output. Before any of the bigger legal trouble hit, Mookie had already caught a case in 2018 for a string of car burglaries and did a short stint before getting out in 2019. But the case that actually defined the rest of his and Slugger T's story came just months later when a Jacksonville Sheriff's Office launched an investigation called Operation Wrap Up. Operation Wrap Up targeted a group of young men law enforcement believed were using social media and music videos to threaten rivals and flex real weapons on camera. 6 people were named in that investigation, and 2 of them were Tyler Jackson and Tyler Simmons, Mookie and Slugger T. Police alleged the men used their online presence and their music to intimidate people and glorify violence. And investigators specifically pointed to Mookie's video for his track Draco, which referenced the Wasabi shooting as evidence containing what they believed were real firearms. Since Mookie and several others in the group were convicted felons, being seen holding a gun in a music video, real or not, was charged with possession of a weapon as a delinquent found to have committed a felony act. 4 other men were also swept up in that same operation: 26-year-old Ronnie Myrick, 28-year-old Nicholas Parker, 29-year-old Christopher Parker, and 17-year-old Tyler Smith. At the press conference announcing the arrest, police said they were still actively searching for 3 additional suspects connected to the investigation who remained at large. On that timing, this operation landed at the worst possible moment for Mookie and Slugger T, right as their music was starting to actually travel outside Jacksonville. But that's not even the crazy part. Mookie was denied bond and stayed locked up fighting his case for years. During that stretch, a rumor spread through Jacksonville that his fellow KTA-affiliated rapper Spot Got Him had cooperated with police, and that his information helped lead to Mookie's arrest. According to that rumor, before Spot Got Him blew up nationally with his breakout hit Beatbox, his own residence had been raided by Jacksonville police, who allegedly recovered pills, illegal firearms, and ammunition during their search. The claim making the rounds was that Mookie happened to be present during that same raid, and that Spot Got Him told officers on scene that Mookie had been trying to hide a firearm. Ace's brother, who goes by ATKYBZ, publicly released paperwork online that he claimed backed up that exact version of events, alleging it was that statement to police that ultimately led to Mookie's arrest. Mookie himself later shut that rumor down from behind bars, publicly defending Spot Got Him and calling him his brother, which most people took as proof the snitching claim was overblown or outright false. Because if it were true, it's unlikely Mookie would have stood on business for him the way he did. In 2021, Mookie's attorney put out a public statement accusing the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office and the State Attorney's Office of misconduct in how the original weapons cases were built, claiming the guns shown in some of the videos were actually props and that a separate related investigation had been exposed as corrupt. Mookie remained behind bars because of a separate still pending weapons charge tied to a firearm found in the glove compartment of a car he was riding in as a passenger, a gun his lawyer maintained never belonged to him. According to his legal team, a witness even came forward confirming Mookie had nothing to do with that gun. But prosecutors continued pursuing the case anyway, largely, his attorney argued, because Mookie had already been labeled a gang number in the public record. In that same statement, without naming Spot Got Him outright, Mookie's attorney also referenced the earlier snitching allegations directly, claiming prosecutors were trying to hand Mookie 15 years in prison off the back of a false allegation originally made by a juvenile in an unrelated weapons investigation. Language that lined up almost exactly with the raid story and the paperwork ATKYBZ had put out. Slugger T had his own struggles behind bars during this stretch too. At one point, rumors circulated that he'd been stabbed while incarcerated after his mother allegedly posted about it on social media before quickly deleting the post. That rumor was never officially confirmed, but given how deep the beef between Y and R and rival Jacksonville sets ran, nobody was shocked there was even a possibility. Simmons, Slugger T, went to trial first. In January of 2022, a jury convicted him of possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. A few weeks later, Jackson's case went in front of a different jury, and this is the part of the story that got the most attention from local media because of exactly how the state built this case. Prosecutors leaned entirely on Mookie's video for the track Murder 1, where he's seen holding what investigators believe was a real AK-47 style rifle. Here's what made it complicated. Investigators never actually recovered a physical weapon from Mookie and never personally witnessed him holding one in real life. There was no gun in the evidence locker, no confiscation, nothing seized from a search. The entire case rested on a jury watching a music video and being convinced the weapon on screen was genuine and not a prop. To make that case, the prosecutor walked jurors through Mookie's lyrics almost line by line during closing arguments, breaking down the words the same way an English teacher might dissect a poem, except every image she pointed to was framed as a coded admission of gang activity rather than artistic expression. She specifically highlighted a moment where Mookie is shown burning a card associated with the Ace of Spades, telling the jury flatly that it was a direct symbolic shot at Youngin Ace. Tying the video back to the larger ATK-KTA war the jury had already heard about through other testimony. Her closing argument to the jury was blunt and became the most talked about moment of the whole trial, essentially telling jurors that nobody performs those words holding a fake firearm. Mookie's own defense attorney Kevin Rout pushed back hard on that entire strategy, arguing in his own closing that the state shouldn't be allowed to treat a rap video like a confession. That analyzing lyrics for a jury as if they were sworn testimony set a dangerous precedent for what an artist can and can't put in a song. The jury didn't see it that way. After close to 3 hours of deliberation, they came back with a guilty verdict, convicting Jackson of possession of a firearm by a convicted felon and putting him in a position to face up to 30 years in state prison. His mother, Diane Watts, was in the courtroom for the verdict, and she didn't hold back afterward, telling reporters it was sad and painful to watch what happened to her son, insisting he had no gang affiliation and that the weapon in question was nothing more than a prop from a music video shoot. At his sentencing hearing that April, Jackson stood in front of Judge Meredith Charbula and tried to separate the man from the persona. He told the court directly that he wasn't a violent person and wasn't a gang member, insisting his music was entertainment, giving his fans what they wanted to hear, rather than a literal account of his life, and that music was simply how he made his living. The prosecution saw it differently, and reported from the hearing noted the judge herself told him plainly that he was a danger to the community as she handed down the sentence. She gave him 10 years, a fraction of the 30 he was facing, but still a decade of his life gone. Simmons had already been sentenced roughly a month earlier for his conviction and received 7 years. So there it is. The murder twins, the duo whose whole identity was built on loyalty and matching energy, ended up matching each other. One more time, 2 Tylers, 2 felony gun convictions, 2 prison sentences handed down within weeks of each other in the same Duval County courthouse, based almost entirely on the same music videos that made them famous in the first place. By the time both sentences were locked in, the investigation into the wider Jacksonville drill scene had touched almost everyone connected to Y&R, KTA, and ATK in one way or another. Mookie and Slugger T's family paid a price too. The years lost weren't just theirs, they were their mothers, their siblings, their kids, if they had them. Even after sentencing, the story didn't just go quiet. Footage later surfaced online showing investigators trying to get Mookie to cooperate against Slugger T during questioning, pushing him repeatedly to give up information on his co-defendant. According to that footage, Mookie held firm and refused to budge, refusing to give law enforcement anything on his day 1. Whatever else changed for these two, the money, the fame, the years taken from them, that loyalty between them held up under direct pressure from law enforcement. And in the world these two came from, that means something. Photos also surfaced during Slugger T's incarceration, showing him posted up comfortably with other inmates, which fans took as reassurance he was holding his own on the inside. especially after the earlier, unconfirmed rumors about him being attacked with a knife behind bars. Here's where it gets real for the fans who've been rocking with this story since the beginning. Slugger T has been released from prison after serving his 7-year sentence. With credit for the time he spent locked up fighting the case since his initial arrest, Tyler Simmons is finally home in Jacksonville. His return has already sparked a wave of reaction across social media, with fans buzzing about what his release means for the Y&R name and whether new music from him is on the way now that he's free to make it. Mookie's situation is different. His 10-year sentence means he's still on the inside as of this video, though based on his timeline and credit for time served, there's real anticipation building in Jacksonville that his own release could be coming as soon as next year. Until then, the murder twins remain split for the first time since they linked up all those years ago. One home, one still counting down the days. What happened to Mookie and Slugger T wasn't some isolated Florida thing, an understanding that is key to understanding why their case matters. At almost the exact same time their case was working through Duval County, a much bigger version of the same fight was playing out 800 miles away in Atlanta, where Grammy-winning rapper Young Thug and dozens of alleged associates of his label, YSL, were indicted on racketeering charges. Prosecutors there argued that YSL wasn't just a record label, it was a criminal street gang, and just like in Mookie's case, they leaned heavily on lyrics to make that argument, presenting entire verses to a jury and asking them to read violent lines as literal confessions rather than artistic exaggeration. A Fulton County judge ultimately ruled that those lyrics could be admitted as evidence, a decision that set off alarm bells across the entire music industry. Major artists including Jay-Z, Killer Mike, and Meek Mill signed onto a public letter urging lawmakers to change how courts treat rap lyrics, arguing that the practice strips the genre of its status as art and hands prosecutors an unfair advantage, letting them treat rhymed storytelling as if it were sworn admission of guilt, even when the rest of the state's evidence is thin. That same year, California became the first state in the country to pass a law specifically limiting how prosecutors can use an artist's lyrics or creative work against them in court, a direct response to cases exactly like this one. The YSL trial itself became a case study in how chaotic these mega cases can get once lyrics and gang theory start driving the courtroom drama. Jury selection alone took nearly 10 months. By the time it was over, the trial had gone through 2 different judges and seen 2 separate defense attorneys arrested in connection with the case. The first judge, Earl Glanville, held Young Thug's own attorney Brian Steele in contempt of court and had him taken into custody after Steele refused to reveal how he'd learned about a secret meeting the judge held with prosecutors and a cooperating witness without any defense lawyers present. Steele was initially sentenced to jail time over his refusal to talk, though Georgia's Supreme Court later stepped in, suspended the punishment, and eventually reversed the contempt order entirely. Glanville himself was removed from the case a few weeks later after a separate judge ruled that the secret meeting had created a real appearance of bias, and Young Thug's team argued publicly that the judge had effectively become part of the prosecution's team. On top of that, one of the defense attorneys representing a different co-defendant was arrested mid-trial on charges of participating in criminal street gang activity and evidence tampering, adding to a case Georgia legal observers were already calling one of the most expensive and chaotic in the state's history. The YSL case eventually ended almost entirely in plea deals rather than jury verdicts, with Young Thug accepting a deal that kept him out of additional prison time but came loaded down with years of probation, a ban from the Atlanta area, and a condition that he avoid gang references in his own music going forward. Gunna took an earlier plea and walked free with a short sentence, a decision that split his fan base between those who understood it as a smart legal move and those who felt he compromised his co-defendants to do it. Mookie's case never got that kind of national spotlight, and unlike Young Thug's Rieko case, his conviction wasn't about running a criminal enterprise. It was a straightforward felon in possession charge built almost entirely on a single music video. But the underlying tension is identical. A prosecutor standing in front of a jury, treating a rap song less like a piece of music and more like a diary entry, and asking 12 ordinary people to convict a man based on what he performed rather than what he was caught holding. Florida hasn't passed anything close to California's protections, which means for artists still making music in Jacksonville's drill scene today, the exact same legal exposure that caught up Mookie and Slugger T is still sitting there waiting for the next viral video. The community learned a hard lesson from all of this. And today, the current status of almost everyone connected to Mookie and Slugger T's world tells its own version. Start with K-Su, the same rapper who once taunted Y and R over the block party shootout, in his own verses is now serving life plus 10 years for 2 separate murders connected to that same circle of violence. In October of 2025, a Duval County jury convicted Hakeem Robinson and his cousin Leroy Whitaker Jr. of first-degree murder in the 2020 killing of fellow Jacksonville rapper Charles Lil Buck McCormick Jr., with prosecutors arguing the motive was a diss track McCormick had made about a relative of Robinson's father. That trial leaned on the exact same kind of evidence used against Mookie. Robinson's own song, Soul Homicide, and an Instagram post reading, Bye Bye, were presented to the jury as proof of motive and intent, even as the defense argued the state was criminalizing music rather than proving murder. The jury convicted anyway, and both men were sentenced to life. Then, in February of 2026, with that life sentence already on the books, Robinson pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in the 2019 killing of Bibby, adding another 10 years on top of the life sentence. 2 more members of Robinson's own family were pulled into the McCormick case with him. His brother got 12 years, and his father, who ultimately testified against his own son, was sentenced to time served. Then there's Spot 'em Got 'em, real name Nehemiah Harden, whose own legal history since blowing up off Beatbox reads almost as chaotic as Mookie and Slugger T's. In July of 2021, just as his song was climbing the Billboard Hot 100, Harden was arrested by U.S. Marshals inside a Miami hotel room, found lying in bed next to an AK-47 pistol, and charged with aggravated assault with a firearm and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, after allegedly pulling a gun on a parking garage attendant during a dispute over an $80 fee. Less than a year later, in June of 2022, he was arrested again after allegedly trying to flee police on a jet ski near Miami Marine Stadium, while he was already out on bond for the earlier gun case. In September of 2021, he also survived a drive-by shooting of his own in Miami. Then in July of 2023, Harden was arrested a 3rd time after leading Miami-Dade police on a high-speed chase in North Miami Beach that ended in a collision, with officers again recovering illegal firearms. Whatever the outcome of any individual case, the pattern is impossible to ignore. A young man who came up in the exact same KTA orbit as Mookie and Slugger T, catching the exact same kind of felon and possession charges over and over, years after his own name first got tied to the rumors around Mookie's arrest. And then there's Youngin Ace, the rival whose entire beef with Yai and R helped shape this whole story, who's had maybe the strangest outcome of anyone in it. He's still out here, still recording, and by most accounts, doing better commercially than he ever has. Ace turned the trauma of the Wasabi shooting into a whole career built around survival, releasing a steady stream of albums and mixtapes through the mid-2020s, working with Kodak Black, Boosie Badazz, and other major names, and building a reported net worth in the millions. But the streets and the law haven't fully let him go either. In April of 2024, he was arrested in Jacksonville Beach after police found 7 firearms in an SUV he was riding in, and Jacksonville sheriff has publicly named him in press conferences as someone law enforcement continues to watch closely. Ace was also one of the people questioned in connection with the July 2024 murder of Julio in Tampa, though Ace himself was not among those ultimately charged in that case. What Mookie and Slugger T's case represents goes beyond just 2 rappers from Jacksonville catching gun charges. Their story became one of the most talked about examples of a pattern that's played out again and again across the country. Prosecutors using rap videos, lyrics, and social media posts as the backbone of criminal cases, arguing that what an artist puts in a song is a confession rather than a creative expression. Whether you believe that's a fair legal strategy or a targeted attack on an entire genre and the young men who make it, the Murder Twins case sits right in the middle of that debate, alongside bigger cases like the YSL case that dominated headlines around the same time. Their music is still out there, still racking up views, still quoted by fans who weren't even old enough to understand the beef when it was actually happening in real time. The Murder Twins song alone pulled in millions of views and turned 2 dudes from Arlington and the North Side into names recognized across Jacksonville's entire drill scene, standing shoulder to shoulder with bigger names like Julio, Spot 'em Got 'em, and their rivals in Ace's camp. And the bigger war their beef was always a smaller piece of never really found peace either. Julio survived shooting after shooting for years, Houston in the summer of 2023, then his own hometown that October, when he was ambushed in a residential Jacksonville neighborhood and had to drive himself to the hospital with a foot injury. He used to joke on Instagram Live that he couldn't die, that he had voodoo protecting him. That protection ran out on June 23rd, 2024, his birthday weekend, when he traveled from Jacksonville to Tampa to celebrate and perform, and was tracked down and ambushed. He was killed, and 3 other people were wounded in the shooting. The case that followed turned into a nearly 2-year legal saga. Prosecutors laid out at trial how Fulio had posted his travel plans and his exact location down to the bar and the time window on Instagram over the course of a week, and how a group of rival gang members allegedly used that information to plan a coordinated ambush, traveling from Jacksonville to Tampa together, packing weapons at a house on video, and using brass catchers on their firearms and wiping down their vehicle afterward to avoid leaving evidence behind. 5 people were ultimately arrested and charged: Isaiah Chance, Sean Gaffright, Rashad Murphy, and Davion Murphy, along with a woman named Alicia Andrews, who prosecutors said served as a lookout while dating one of the 4 men. Ballistic evidence tied Gaffright's vehicle to an earlier failed attempt on Fulio's life back in October of 2023, connecting that same gun to the fatal shooting 8 months later. Andrews went to trial first, and in October of 2025, a jury convicted her of the lesser charge of manslaughter rather than first-degree murder, accepting her defense's argument that she had no direct knowledge of the actual murder plot, even though she traveled with the group. Her sentencing turned into its own legal circus. The original trial judge was removed from her case on appeal after her attorneys argued the judge had shown open hostility toward the defense. A new judge was brought in, and in May of 2026, she was ultimately sentenced to 15 years in prison. The 4 men went to trial together that spring in a case that stretched across 16 days of testimony, with prosecutors seeking the death penalty for all of them. Jurors heard about surveillance footage placing the men in Tampa, cell phone data and text messages documenting the plot, and DNA evidence, including one defendant's own DNA, recovered from tape wrapped around a rifle connected to the shooting. The defense argued the case was built on circumstantial evidence, and in one defendant's case specifically, that his own cell phone never actually placed him in Tampa at the time of the murder. On May 8th, 2026, after 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found all 4 men guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy, with 3 of them also convicted on multiple counts of attempted murder for the other people wounded in the shooting. In the sentencing phase that followed, the same jury found that aggravating factors justifying the death penalty existed, but chose to spare all 4 men's lives anyway. After a formal sentencing that June, several of the men used their moment in front of the court to speak directly to young people watching, with one of them bluntly telling the room that the whole beef, all the dissing and the shooting wasn't worth where he'd ended up. The judge sentenced all 4 to life in prison without parole, with additional consecutive life sentences and decades-long terms stacked on top for the related conspiracy and attempted murder counts. Jacksonville prosecutors described the killing as retaliation tied to the same rivalry that had been running since Zion Brown's murder back in 2017. The same rivalry Y and R, Mookie and Slugger T's own beef with Ace, had been riding alongside the entire time. And on the other side of that war, Sue, the same rapper who once taunted Y and R over the block party shootout in his own verses, is now serving life plus 10 years for 2 separate murders connected to that same circle of violence. For Mookie and Slugger T specifically, their legacy right now is still being written. One man is home trying to figure out what a second chance looks like after 7 years taken from him. The other is still inside, watching the calendar, waiting for his own shot at rebuilding whatever life comes after a decade behind bars. Whether the murder twins get back in the studio together, whether Jacksonville's drill scene has room for them the way it did when they first blew up, and whether this chapter of their lives ends up being a comeback story or just the closing of a book that's still unfolding in real time. One thing's for certain, gang, the story of the murder twins is proof of how thin the line got between the music and the reality behind it in Jacksonville's rap scene, and how 2 homies who built their whole name on loyalty ended up paying for that loyalty with years of their lives. Lil Double O and Matt Critter went to war. 2 dudes from the same street, the same gang, the same block. But what happened between them didn't just end a friendship, it split 700 down the middle and turned 7th Street into a bloodbath.
She never shot at me. I'm trying to kill walk down guy on my mama. I'm trying to take one head out. And I'm a troll every day. Put the police on me, my queen. I know you go do it.
Baby Walk just got exposed for the pump, so double O mad. You mad at me cause your brother pump? Huh?
We're talking about two of the most talked about rappers coming out of North Memphis right now. Dudes who were literally in the studio together, shouting each other out on tracks, building towards something real in the industry. And then out of nowhere, it all collapsed into threats, exposés, chain snatching allegations, leaked videos, and bodies. No cap, this story goes way deeper than some rap beef. Because behind the Instagram lives and the subliminal diss tracks, there's a murder case hanging over Matt Critter's head involving a man from their own gang. A brutal street war between 700 and EBG that's been claiming lives for years, and allegations that somebody in 700 started backdooring their own people before any of the public drama even kicked off. By the time we break this whole thing down for you, you're going to understand exactly why 7th Street is at the point it's at right now. And trust me, this situation is way more layered than anything you've seen on the blogs. Here's what you need to understand right out the gate. Mac Critter and Lil Double O didn't just happen to end up in the same place. These are two dudes who came up on the exact same street, 7th Street, North Memphis, repping the same set, 700, and building their rap careers side by side. Matt Critter was shouting out Double O on his breakout track Torture in 2021, literally rapping about keeping Double O by his side. They had joint projects, they had studio sessions, they had the same OGs behind them, the same enemies, the same history. Then Lil Double O jumps on Instagram Live and says he's gonna piss on Matt Critter and his homie Vato's graves. Let that sink in. That's not regular rap beef. That's not some label dispute or ghostwriting allegation. When somebody who ran the streets with you is talking about desecrating your grave, something real happened in real life to get it to that point. And that's exactly what we're breaking down today, the full story. From the foundation of 700 all the way through the war with EBG, the death of Junior Boss, the alleged backdoor murder that might have started everything, Mac Critter's ongoing murder case, and how two of Memphis's most promising young voices ended up at each other's throats. Let me break it down for you from the top, because none of this makes sense without understanding where 700 came from and who these dudes really are. North Memphis runs deep with history, and 7th Street is one of those blocks that's produced real ones for decades. Before Matt Critter and Lil Double O's era, the dudes from 7th Street went by a different name, Murder Squad. And Murder Squad wasn't just a name. These were street dudes who had the attention of some of the biggest names in the rap industry, most notably Future, who linked in with the crew around 2014 to a rapper named Zona Man who was signed to Future's Free Bands label. That connection laid the foundation for everything that came after. The music deals, the studio access, the mentorship, and it directly shaped who Matt Critter and Lil Double O became as artists. But while Future was pulling Murder Squad members into the music industry pipeline, the streets weren't letting go that easily. Back in 2015, law enforcement hit the crew with a massive indictment and locked up 16 members at one time. That move changed the dynamic on 7th Street significantly, but it didn't kill the culture. The younger generation, the Mac Critters, the Lil Double O's, the Baby Walkdowns, inherited the block and kept the 700 name alive. And for a minute, it looked like this new generation was gonna do something different. They had music buzzing, they had major label connections, they had momentum, but the streets never fully released them. And when things started going sideways with the beef between 700 and a rival crew called EBG, the whole story shifted into something way more serious. To really understand how Matt Critter and Lil Double O ended up where they are right now, you've got to understand the war that was already happening around them before their personal beef went public. Let's go back and build this thing from the foundation, because the roots of this whole situation stretch back further than most people realize. Matt Critter was born and raised in a hood in North Memphis called Scudderfield. When the projects got shut down in the early 2000s, his family moved to 7th Street, and that's where his entire identity got shaped. By the time he was 12 years old, Matt Critter was already active in the streets. He wasn't just hanging around, he was in it, and the legal system noticed. He started catching charges at a young age, going in and out of juvenile facilities and county lockups, while also developing his identity as a rapper on the side. He started dropping music around 2017, but nothing was really moving units back then. Matt kept one foot in the music and both feet in the trenches, which is exactly the kind of dual life that either propels a Memphis street rapper to legendary status, or gets them caught up before they can cash in on the momentum. For a few years, it looked like the streets were winning, but then he linked with an OG from 7th Street named Scratch, who signed him when he was 18 and gave him a real platform to push his music from. Even with Scratch's backing, it took a minute. Matt Critter kept grinding, kept dropping music, and kept surviving situations that would have ended a lot of people's stories. Then in 2021, everything changed. He dropped Torture and the city locked in. On that track, he shouted out 700, shouted out Lil Double O by name, and made it clear that this wasn't just rap for him. This was a direct extension of who he was in the streets. The track blew up locally and put Matt Critter on the radar in a way none of his earlier music had managed. Around that same time, Lil Double O was making his own waves. He and Mac were collaborating on tracks, Act Up, Laser Quest, Gravedigger, and from the outside looking in, these two looked like they were built to run Memphis together. They had chemistry in the booth, they had shared street credibility, and they both had legitimate major label backing starting to materialize. Lil Double O connected with Future's Free Band's label, which given the history between Future and 7th Street made perfect sense. Matt Critter went a different route and linked with Gucci Mane, signing to 1017 Records. In an interview on Off the Porch in 2023, Matt Critter talked about how he reached out to Gucci directly and Gucci hit him back immediately. He said the speed of the response caught him off guard. Damn was how he put it.
I reached out to him and he hit me back instantly I was like, damn. Oh, shit.
Which tells you he knew exactly what that kind of cosign meant for where he was trying to go. Mac even mentioned that despite being signed to 1017, he still moved as an unofficial Free Band's affiliate because of how tight his connection to Future's world was. He shouted out Double O during that same interview, along with Double O's brother Baby Walk Down, and talked about how they'd all known each other since they were kids. That's the picture from late 2022 going into 2023. Two young Memphis rappers with real industry juice, real street credibility, and real ties to some of the biggest names in the game, seemingly positioned to take over together. But behind that picture, something was already rotting, and a series of violent events were about to expose it. Now here's where things start getting real. Because while the music was popping off for both Matt Critter and Lil Double O, 700 was in the middle of a brutal war that nobody in the mainstream was paying attention to. 700 and EBG, He Spoke of Grim Nasty, another crew from Memphis, had a history of running together at some point. But somewhere along the line, something sparked between them. And by the time this story really gets going, they were deep in a bloody back and forth that was claiming lives on both sides. Rumors point to a specific origin point. A dude from EBG named Mooney allegedly started beefing with Baby Walked Out, Lil Double O's brother, and that's reportedly what lit the fuse. Once that personal beef spilled over into the crew level, it escalated fast. According to what's been reported, Mooney allegedly shot an OG from 700 and First. That move made a response inevitable. A group of 700 affiliates pulled up on Mooney with 4 different cars and opened fire. It's not confirmed exactly who pulled the trigger on Mooney, but a lot of people in the streets credited Junior Boss with the kill shot. Whether that's accurate or not, Mooney ended up dead, and 700's most aggressive shooter, Junior Boss, became the name attached to it. Junior Boss deserves some real context here because he was a significant figure in the 700 ecosystem. His father was a man named Maserati Bo, one of the most respected OGs on the north side of Memphis. Maserati Bo had a reputation for getting money and living flashy. There are actual videos of him and Scratch riding through Memphis in a Bentley. He was connected, he was well regarded, and he died in a car crash, leaving Junior Boss to carry on the family name in the streets. Junior Boss reportedly took that seriously. According to what's been reported, he was putting in major work for 700 and allegedly had a body count that people in those circles talked about openly. Junior Boss was also charged with killing a dude named Emmett Beasley, known as PSO Emmett, back in 2021. Whether he ever faced real legal consequences for that is unclear from available reports. But the charge adds to the picture of someone who was deeply embedded in the violence surrounding 700 and its war with EBG. Then there's the situation with Lil Said. Lil Said was a member of EBG who went missing back in 2022. A few months later, his body was discovered in the lake. The circumstances were murky. Some people said it was just a car crash that Said and some EBG dudes were fleeing from ops. Their car wrecked and Said's body ended up in the water with no foul play beyond the initial chase. Others pointed the finger directly at 700 and specifically at Junior Boss. What made people lean toward the foul play theory was what happened after Junior Boss died. An EBG member hopped on social media and said that Said and Mooney could finally rest. which a lot of people read as confirmation that EBG believed 700 was responsible for both deaths. Future apparently stayed locked in with 700 through all of this. On his track Ocean, he rapped a direct tribute to Junior Boss, acknowledging both who he was and how he went out. That kind of shout out from someone at Future's level meant something. It told you just how close the connection between Free Bands and 7th Street really was, and how real the losses hit the people around them. But here's where it gets crazy, because while EBG was 700's main war on one front, 700 was also beefing with a separate set called 400. And it was that beef, not the one with EBG, that ultimately killed Junior Boss. In 2023, a dude from 400 named Zay Street slid into 700's hood and started letting off shots. Junior Boss shot back. He reportedly took out Zay Street in the exchange, but Junior Boss got hit too, and he died at the scene. Just like that, 700's most feared enforcer, the son of a legendary OG, allegedly the man behind multiple bodies in the EBG war, was gone. His homie WD JD put it in a track called Long Live JR Boss, questioning how someone as thorough as Junior Boss ended up dying alone in a shootout, rapping about how Junior Boss didn't go out by himself, he dragged somebody with him, the way he always said he would. But the loss was massive. 700 lost their biggest street presence in a single day, and the ripple effects of that loss are still being felt. Now watch how the sequence unfolds after Junior Boss dies, because this is where Matt Critter and Lil Double O's personal situation starts bleeding into the public. After Junior Boss got killed, everything on 7th Street went sideways. The external pressure from the wars with EBG and 400 was already at a breaking point, and now the internal dynamics of 700 started fracturing in ways that couldn't be hidden anymore. The first public sign that something was wrong came when Matt Critter's brother Mac D went on Instagram Live and made a shocking declaration. Dudes from Walk Down Gang had tried to shoot him, and because of that he was trying to kill Walk Down Gang. He said it plain, shouldn't have shot at me. I'm trying to kill Walk Down Gang. On my mama, I'm trying to take one of them butch's head off, and I'm a troll every day. Now here's why that matters. Walk Down Gang, also known as WDG, is a crew that Lil Double O and his brother Baby Walk Down are connected to. So Mac D is essentially announcing war on people tied directly to Double O's family. That alone would have been enough to cause problems, but then Lil Double O himself hopped into the comments of the Instagram Live and took it to another level. He said he was gonna piss on Matt Critter and his homie Vato's graves, not just a threat, a statement of complete disrespect. Pissing on someone's grave in that context means you don't just want them dead, you want to defile the memory. That's maximum disrespect in any language, and the streets understood exactly what Double O was communicating. Vato clapped back and told Double O to keep his name out of his mouth, but the situation kept escalating. Matt Critter responded by going further than just the beef itself. He drew a line in the sand about the structure of 700, claiming that Walk Down Gang is not part of 700. That's a significant statement. He wasn't just beefing with Double O personally, he was trying to separate WDG from the broader 700 umbrella, which had massive implications for how loyalties would line up going forward. But then Matt Critter did something that took the whole situation to a level that was beyond rap beef. He leaked a video of Baby Walk Down, Double O's brother, allegedly in a compromising sexual situation with another man. That kind of move in the culture they come from is designed to do maximum damage. It's not just embarrassing a person in the video, it's an attack on their identity, their reputation, and their standing in the streets. No cap, that's one of the most aggressive non-violent moves you can make in these kinds of situations. And it showed that Matt Critter was not trying to de-escalate anything. Baby Walk Down clapped back by claiming he had snatched Matt Critter's chain. He also said he made Matt Critter's homie Mac D show him a level of submission in the streets. Matt Critter's people pushed back on the chain story, saying the chain was actually borrowed, that when everybody was still cool, Baby Walk Down had borrowed it from Matt Critter, and the whole snatch narrative was fabricated. But whether the chain was borrowed or snatched, the story was already out there doing damage. Lil Double O then got on camera himself and went at Matt Critter on the money angle, saying he had way more money than Matt Critter and wasn't going to give him any additional clout by responding too deeply. He also went at Matt Critter's jewelry, questioning whether it was even real. You could see the strategy in Double O's approach. He was trying to minimize Matt Critter's significance while still getting his shots in. But the fact that he was responding at all told you that the situation was eating at him. Then Mac Critter added another layer to the beef by bringing up something that had nothing to do with 7th Street directly. The beef between Lil Double O and Real Boston Richie. Both Double O and Boston Richie are signed to Future's Free Bands label, and apparently their relationship deteriorated to the point where Richie was allegedly sending shots at Double O in his music. On a track called Cut Off Boston Richie, Richie allegedly rapped lines aimed at Double O and the Walk Down gang crew, saying that Double O wasn't the only trap shooter in their circle. Mac Critter claimed that Lil Double O actually came to him asking for help making a Boston Richie diss track, and he used that information publicly to paint Double O as someone who was out here running to his now enemies for help when he had problems. Whether that's accurate or not, Mac Critter used it as a tool to embarrass Double O further. The Boston Richie situation got even messier when alleged paperwork got exposed. A rapper named NFL 2-Wop, also affiliated with Future's label, allegedly got hold of documents suggesting that Boston Richie had cooperated with law enforcement in a case where he was threatened by a dude named Wig. Then 1090 Jake, who specializes in digging up this kind of documentation, reportedly found additional paperwork allegedly linking Richie to cooperation in a separate case from 2013. Richie denied everything, and no court has confirmed any of this, but the allegations spread fast. Then NFL 2-Wop was shot and killed in 2023, and immediately rumors started flying that Boston Richie had something to do with it, that 2-Wop got killed because he aired out Richie's alleged paperwork. There's no evidence to support that narrative, but in the culture that surrounds these dudes, the accusation alone is enough to create serious problems. And with Mac Critter publicly tying Lil Double O to all of this drama, the Boston Richie beef, the alleged paperwork, the 2-Wop situation, the picture he was painting was of someone whose whole circle was compromised. This is where everything was sitting publicly. But none of the social media drama is what actually put Mac Critter in the most legal danger. For that, you have to go back to 2022 and a murder that almost nobody outside of Memphis was talking about. Here's the situation that might define Mac Critter's future more than any song or street beef ever could. Back in 2022, a member of 700 named Mac Dimp was at an empty lot on 660 Wells Avenue in North Memphis. According to a witness account, an SUV pulled up to the lot. Mac Critter was inside the vehicle. He called Dimp over to the SUV. That's when Mac Critter's associate Gary Taylor allegedly pulled out a weapon and shot Mac Dimp dead. Let that sink in. A 700 member allegedly getting killed, allegedly lured to his death by people from inside 700 itself. The motive that circulated in the streets was personal and ugly. Rumors said that Mac Dimp had a child with Mac Critter's sister, and that the relationship between them had turned violent, that Dimp was allegedly putting his hands on her. If those rumors are accurate, then Mac Critter's alleged involvement in Dimp's death wasn't about gang politics at all. It was about family. But regardless of the motivation, the result was the same. A member of their own gang was dead, allegedly at the hands of someone inside that same gang. Mac Critter's associate Butterball was allegedly also present at the scene when Dimp was killed. And then Butterball's own story took a dark turn. On December 21st, 2022, Memphis police were investigating a murder scene in North Memphis. There was a crowd of people gathered around watching the scene unfold. Right before the cops were about to clear out, someone in that crowd pulled out a gun and shot Butterball while he was driving past. He died from his injuries. Rumors in the street said Butterball got backdoored, killed by people from 700 because of his alleged involvement in Mac Dimp's death. The theory was that whoever inside 700 was loyal to Dimp decided to handle Butterball's retaliation. There's no verified evidence for that theory, but in the context of everything else happening inside 700 at the time, the timing was suspicious enough that people ran with it. Mac Critter was booked for Mac Dimp's murder, and as of the information available, he's still fighting that case. If he gets convicted, we're talking about a man who was signed to Gucci Mane's label, who had one of the hottest songs in Memphis in 2021, and who was positioned to potentially cross over into mainstream recognition, spending the rest of his productive years behind bars. Now the situation with Jizzle adds another dimension to Mac Critter's alleged body count. EBG's most prominent rapper is a dude named Jizzle, someone who caught a juvenile life sentence for robbery when he was barely a teenager, beat the case down to probation, then caught more charges for shooting up a car, and somehow still managed to build a rap career that got him in the room with artists like Snoop Dogg. Jizzle was moving in the music industry while still being deeply involved in the EBG street politics, and that put him directly in Mac Critter's crosshairs. Rumors circulating in Memphis say that Mac Critter killed one of E Jizzle's close homies, and that E Jizzle chose not to retaliate, at least not in any direct way. Mac Critter reportedly addressed this on the track Ho Jizzle, rapping that he buried E Jizzle's homie, and that E Jizzle refused to acknowledge it publicly. Whether that claim is true or fabricated for rap purposes is impossible to verify from the outside, but the track exists and Mac Critter put his name on those words. The other notable beef that E Jizzle had going on during this period was with Pooh Shiesty. Before Pooh Shiesty got locked up, he dissed E Jizzle on a track Back in Blood with Lil Durk. The lyrics reference a situation where Pooh Shiesty's crew allegedly stole guns directly from E Jizzle and his homies and basically dared them to come get their property back. Pooh Shiesty was saying that E Jizzle knew exactly who took the guns and was too scared to confront them about it. E Jizzle and his associate Mooslan responded with a remix and addressed the situation in interviews. E Jizzle confirmed that Pooh Shiesty's crew did take guns from them, but tried to minimize it by saying nobody was home at the time, so it wasn't as direct a violation as Pooh Shiesty made it sound. He also called Pooh Shiesty's street image into question, suggesting the tough guy persona in his music didn't match reality. They traded disses back and forth on social media and through tracks, but when Pooh Shiesty got locked up, that particular beef fizzled out. Still, it gave E Jizzle more visibility in the rap world than he would have had otherwise, even if it wasn't the kind of visibility anyone would choose. As of the most recent information available, E Jizzle is locked up. Lil Double O is reportedly on house arrest in Florida, facing gun and drug charges. Mac Critter is still out, but the Demp murder case is hanging over him like a cloud and could see him locked up at any point. This situation between Mac Critter and Lil Double O is one of those stories that's about way more than two rappers beefing. It's about what happens when the streets and the music industry intersect without any real buffer between them. It's about what happens when the violence from the block follows people into a moment where they could have built something real. Think about what was in front of both of these dudes. Mac Critter had Gucci Mane's cosign, which in the world of southern rap is about as significant as it gets. He had a buzzing track in Torture that put his name in conversations across Memphis and beyond. He had a connection to Future's world through his 7th Street roots that gave him access to one of the most influential figures in modern hip-hop. Lil Double O had an actual deal with Future's Free Bands label, the same label that launched multiple platinum careers. He had the street credibility, he had the charisma, and from everything on record they had genuine chemistry as collaborators. Instead, Double O is on house arrest in Florida. Mac Critter is fighting a murder charge for allegedly killing a member of his own gang. Their beef has split 700 and separated TTG from WDG in a way that may never be repaired. And the 7th Street they both called home is in a messier position than it was before either of them started rapping. The deeper tragedy here is that none of the violence these dudes were involved in, not the 700 versus EPG war, not the 700 versus 400 situation that killed Junior Boss, not the internal drama that allegedly got Mac Demp killed, produced anything that made the people on 7th Street safer or better off. Junior Boss died trading gunfire with someone from 400 who was also dead. Mooney from EBG is dead, Lil Said is dead, Butterball is dead, Mac Demp is dead, and the two young men who had the most realistic shot at using Memphis as a launching pad to build real generational wealth are now separated by a beef that grew out of a street war that neither of them started. The Future connection to 7th Street is worth reflecting on in this context too. Future has shouted out these dudes in his music, mentored them, given them industry access. He rapped about Junior Boss after he died. He's been rocking with Murder Squad since 2014. But there's no evidence that the proximity to Future's success translated into a pathway out of the street politics for the people around him. Mac Critter himself said he learned how to rap just by studying Future in the studio. But Future is a billionaire by some estimates, with a catalog that stretches across a decade of hits. The dudes he mentored on 7th Street are either locked up or fighting murder cases. That gap says something important about how difficult it is to actually transfer success when the streets haven't released their grip. The Mac Critter and Lil Double O situation also exposes something that happens in a lot of Memphis street rap stories. The way internal betrayal creates more damage than any outside enemy could. 700 survived the 2015 indictment that locked up 16 members. They survived the war with EBG. They survived the war with 400, even after losing Junior Boss. What they apparently couldn't survive was the fracture from within. The allegations around Mac Demp's death, a 700 member allegedly killed by a 700 member, opened a wound that the Double O and Mac Critter beef then poured salt into. When Mac Critter started publicly claiming that Walk Down Gang wasn't really part of 700, he wasn't just making a personal statement. He was drawing boundary lines inside a gang that had survived by being unified, and once those lines got drawn publicly, there was no walking it back. For real, the way this whole thing played out on social media made everything worse. The Instagram lives, the comments, the leaked videos, the public declarations of who belongs to what, all of that accelerated a breakdown that might have stayed contained if it had stayed off camera. But in 2023 and 2024, there is no staying off camera. Everything that happens in the streets eventually ends up on somebody's phone and gets broadcast to the world. And when your beef is being broadcast in real time, pride makes it almost impossible to back down from anything you said, no matter how much the de-escalation might benefit everyone involved. Now there's also the unresolved question of what the beef between Mac Critter and Lil Double O means for their music going forward. Mac Critter was on a genuine upswing when all of this went down. 1017 has a track record of breaking artists. Gucci has done it over and over. And the kind of authentic Memphis street energy that Mac Critter brings to his music is something that mainstream audiences have shown an appetite for, especially after the success of artists like Pooh Shiesty, who despite being locked up, maintained a fan base that continued to stream his music. If Mac Critter beats the Dimp case and stays out of jail, there's still a lane for him in the industry. But every month that passes with him fighting charges is a month he's not in the studio building momentum. Lil Double O's situation with Future's label is even more complicated now. Being on Freeband should be a career-defining advantage, and Double O has the raw talent to capitalize on it, but house arrest limits what you can do creatively, and the drama with Boston Richie, who is also on Freebands, creates an internal label tension that Future will eventually have to address or let play out. Double O dissing Mac Critter publicly, getting caught up in the chain beef, having his brother's private life leaked. All of that creates noise that doesn't help an artist who's trying to build a mainstream audience. The Boston Richie angle is one of the wildest side stories in all of this because it shows how interconnected all of these dudes are and how quickly an alliance can flip. Richie and Double O were supposedly on the same team, same label, same mentor. And then suddenly, there are diss tracks and alleged paperwork and dead label associates and conspiracy theories flying around. And Mac Critter, who should have been focused on his own situation, was in the middle of all of it, using it as ammunition against Double O. That kind of layered drama is almost impossible to navigate cleanly, which is probably why nobody in that circle seems to be coming out of it looking good. The split between TTG, Train to Go, and WDG, Walk Down Gang, is the structural reality of where things stand now. These were two sub-crews that operated under the 700 umbrella, and now they're separated. What that means on the ground in North Memphis is that dudes who used to be on the same side are now navigating the same streets without the same guarantees of safety they used to have with each other. That's a dangerous situation that goes beyond music and beef and Instagram lives. When street alliances break, people die. We've already seen that pattern play out in the history of 700 itself. The internal fractures around the Dimp situation allegedly led to Butterball getting killed. The fracture between TTG and WDG could produce similar consequences. Nobody outside of the people directly involved knows exactly what sparked all of this. The most widely circulated theory is that it started with the aftermath of Mac Dimp's death and the internal suspicion that came with it. That members of 700 started looking at each other differently once word got out about what allegedly happened on Wells Avenue, and that the beef between Mac Critter and Lil Double O was at least partially rooted in that distrust. The public spat over Walk Down Gang, the social media wars, Double O threatening Mac Critter's grave. All of it might be downstream of something that started with an internal killing that was supposed to stay between them. What's clear is that 7th Street is in a different position now than it was even 2 years ago. The generation that was supposed to take 700 from Murder Squad's legacy into the streaming era has been fractured, incarcerated, and embroiled in a public beef that's given their enemies in law enforcement exactly the kind of visibility into their operations that nobody benefits from. Mac Critter is still out here, still on the internet, still connected to the music, but the murder case doesn't go away on its own, and every time he makes a public move, he's doing it under the shadow of a potential conviction. Lil Double O is sitting on a deal with one of hip-hop's most important labels, while on house arrest in a different state. watching a situation unfold in Memphis that he's apparently still involved in from a distance. And the streets of North Memphis are living with the consequences of everything that went down. The losses to EBG and 400, the internal fractures, the prison sentences and pending charges that have removed some of their most capable people from the equation. This is what Memphis drill beef looks like when you trace it all the way back to its roots. Not just two rappers talking slick on Instagram. A full ecosystem of violence, loyalty, betrayal, music, money, and loss, playing out in real time on one of the most historically significant streets in a city that has produced more authentic street music than almost anywhere else in the country. The situation between Mac Critter and Lil Double O isn't over. As long as both of them are still breathing and the split between TTG and WDG hasn't been resolved, this story has more chapters to write. And whether those chapters get written in a courtroom, on wax, or back on the streets of North Memphis, you already know Memphis doesn't do anything halfway. That's the full story. Stay locked in. To really appreciate how bad things got between 700 and EBG, you have to understand that this wasn't a beef that started over rap. This was a territorial war that had been building for years before either Mac Critter or Lil Double O had a single song charting anywhere. EBG and 700 used to have a working relationship. These were crews that at minimum tolerated each other and in some periods were reportedly running together. The shift happened gradually, then all at once, the way these things usually do in the streets. The Mooney situation was the flashpoint that most people point to when they talk about how the 700 versus EBG war really ignited. Mooney was a significant figure in EBG, and the allegation that he shot an OG from 700 is what reportedly justified the coordinated response that came next. 4 cars, multiple shooters, a level of organization that tells you this wasn't a spontaneous reaction. Somebody made a decision, put a plan together, and executed it. That kind of response sends a message that goes beyond the immediate beef. It tells every crew in Memphis that 700 is not a squad you can make a move on without paying a serious price. Junior Boss was reportedly at the center of that response, and that's partly why his death hit 700 so hard. He wasn't just a soldier, he was allegedly one of the people organizing and executing the pressure campaign against EBG. Losing him didn't just remove a fighter from the roster, it removed someone who understood the logistics of the conflict better than almost anyone else on 700's side. The situation with Lil Sad adds a layer of tragedy that even people who aren't from Memphis have to reckon with. Here's a young man whose body ends up in a lake under circumstances that are still disputed, and the debate over whether it was an accident or a murder gets settled in the streets through social media posts rather than any kind of official investigation. When the EBG affiliate hopped online after Junior Boss died and said Said and Mooney could rest now, that was essentially a street level confirmation that the two events were connected in people's minds, even if no one will ever say it explicitly under oath. That's the reality of how justice works in these communities. It doesn't go through the courts, it gets acknowledged on Instagram and settled with bullets. The war with 400 that actually killed Junior Boss is a reminder that 700 wasn't just managing one front. They were beefing with EBG on one side and 400 on another side simultaneously, and the manpower required to hold down 2 active wars while also dealing with internal drama is the kind of pressure that breaks organizations apart. Junior Boss dying in the 400 situation, after apparently doing damage to 400's side first by killing Zay Street, shows that even the most capable people in these situations can only manage so much before the math stops working in their favor. The detail about Mac Critter learning how to rap by studying Future in the studio is one of the most telling things in this whole story because it explains both his ceiling and his limitations. Future is arguably the most influential figure in melodic trap. The auto-tune vocal style, the drugged out emotional delivery over heavy 808s, the unapologetically street perspective wrapped in a surprisingly vulnerable emotional core. Mac Critter absorbed all of that, and you can hear Future's influence in the way Mac moves to a track. But what Future had that the dudes he mentored on 7th Street didn't have was distance. By the time Future was making it in Atlanta's music scene, he was operating in a city where his street connections were a credential rather than a liability. Memphis is different. The street connections there are immediate, literal, and the consequences of those connections follow you in ways that Atlanta's music industry machine has a better infrastructure for insulating artists from. Memphis drill lives closer to the street than almost any other regional rap scene in America. which is part of what makes it so visceral and authentic, and also part of what makes it so difficult for artists from that world to fully cross over without leaving pieces of themselves behind. Mac Critter signing to 1017 was a genuine power move. Gucci Mane built 1017 into one of Southern rap's most respected independent labels by putting his personal credibility behind artists who had the right combination of street authenticity and musical talent. The fact that Gucci responded to Mac Critter's outreach immediately told you that somebody, probably in Future's circle, had already talked Mac Critter up before the call ever happened. That's how this industry works at the upper levels. By the time the phone call happens, the decision is usually already made. The Off the Porch interview that Mac Critter did in 2023 is worth digging into for the context it provides on where his head was at. He was talking about Gucci, talking about his future in the music game, shouting out Double O and Baby Walk Down, all while allegedly sitting on an unresolved murder case and in the middle of a street war that was claiming lives around him. That ability to compartmentalize, to sit in front of a camera and project confidence and momentum while carrying all of that weight, is something that a lot of Memphis rappers have, because the alternative is showing vulnerability that can get you killed. But it also means that the public never really knows what's happening behind the scenes until it explodes. Baby Walk Down's role in this whole situation is worth examining separately, because he ended up at the center of two of the most explosive moments in the public beef: the chain allegation and the leaked video. Baby Walk Down is Lil Double O's younger brother, and he's affiliated with Walk Down Gang, which puts him directly in the WDG versus TTG split. When Mac D went on live and declared war on Walk Down Gang, Baby Walk Down wasn't just collateral damage, he was one of the primary targets of that declaration. And the way Mac Critter escalated by leaking the video wasn't just about hurting Baby Walk Down personally. It was a message to Lil Double O that Mac Critter was willing to go beyond street level retaliation and attack the people closest to him in the most humiliating way possible. Baby Walk Down's response, claiming he snatched Mac Critter's chain and made Mac D submit, was an attempt to reframe the narrative. In street culture, having someone's chain means you took something from them that was supposed to represent their identity and their status. If Baby Walk Down actually snatched the chain, that's a significant statement about the power dynamic between the two sides. But if the chain was borrowed, as Mac Critter's people claimed, then Baby Walk Down was taking credit for a theft that never happened, which would undermine his credibility in the streets where these kinds of details matter enormously. The fact that nobody has fully resolved the chain story publicly is actually pretty typical of how these beefs play out. Both sides state their version, neither side is willing to concede the point, and the narrative that gets the most traction on social media becomes the de facto accepted version, whether or not it's accurate. In this case, the borrowed versus snatched debate got swallowed up by everything else that was happening: the murder case, the Double O versus Ricci drama, the TTG and WDG split, and the chain became a footnote in a much larger story. The relationship between Future and 7th Street Memphis is one of the more unusual stories in modern hip-hop, and it deserves more attention than it typically gets. Future is from Atlanta. His connection to Memphis came through Zona Man, a Free Bands affiliated rapper who had ties to the Murder Squad crew. Through Zona Man, Future got introduced to the culture on 7th Street, and what started as a professional connection apparently became something more personal over time. Future shouting out Murder Squad on Cuddle My Wrist in 2018 wasn't just a feature shout out or a random name drop. He was directly acknowledging people by name, including Scratch, who was both an OG on 7th Street and the man who eventually signed Mac Critter. That tells you Future's connection to that block was genuine enough that he was willing to put those names on a major label release. When Lil Double O got signed to Free Bands, it represented the formalization of a relationship that had been building informally for years. And it also created a situation where Future was essentially the connecting thread between people who were starting to go to war with each other. Double O on Free Bands, Mac Critter unofficially connected to Free Bands while signed to 1017. Boston Richie also on Free Bands and allegedly beefing with Double O. NFL 2-Wop on Free Bands and then allegedly getting killed over paperwork he aired out. Future is sitting at the center of all of this, and if you're looking for a figure who has the credibility to potentially mediate any part of it, he's the obvious choice. But there's no public indication that any mediation has happened or that Future has weighed in publicly on the beef between the signees. That silence is itself a kind of statement. When you're running a label and two of your artists are beefing publicly and the third one from your circle has been shot and killed, the calculus of getting involved versus staying out of it gets complicated very fast. Future has spent his career cultivating a reputation for being thorough, connected, and discreet. Getting publicly involved in a street beef involving his signees would break the code of discretion that's been part of how he operates. But staying silent while people around him are dying and beefing has its own cost. Where does all of this leave 7th Street and the 700 ecosystem going forward? Mac Critter's immediate future is defined by the Dim murder case. If he beats it, and murder charges are notoriously difficult to prove without strong physical evidence or reliable witnesses, then he's walking back into a music career that still has real potential. The 1017 deal isn't publicly reported as terminated. Gucci Mane has a long history of holding down his artists through legal situations, partly because he went through serious legal situations himself and came out the other side. There would be a narrative there. The Memphis street rapper who beat a murder case and emerged with something to say about the experience. Memphis audiences respond to that kind of authenticity if the music backs it up. If Mac Critter gets convicted, the calculus changes entirely. A murder conviction puts him away for a long time. And while Memphis rap history is full of artists who maintain fan bases from prison, see the continued reverence for dudes who've been locked up for years, maintaining a music career from behind bars is a different challenge than the one he was facing on the outside. Lil Double O's situation on house arrest in Florida is frustrating because the talent is clearly there and the label infrastructure exists to support him. But house arrest creates logistical limitations that make building momentum in music genuinely difficult. You can't tour. Your ability to move around for studio sessions is restricted. And being away from Memphis while the split between TTG and WDG is playing out means Double O is managing a street situation he can't be physically present for, which creates its own risks. If the house arrest eventually becomes a prison sentence, the timeline for his music career gets pushed back significantly. The split between TTG and WDG is perhaps the most consequential long-term outcome of this whole situation. Both crews had identity and purpose under the 700 umbrella. Separately, they're smaller, more vulnerable, and more likely to make decisions out of pride rather than strategy. The history of Memphis gang dynamics shows that internal splits tend to produce more violence than external beefs, because the parties involved know each other too well. They know each other's habits, hangout spots, daily routines. That kind of intimate knowledge makes conflict between former allies uniquely dangerous. The broader lesson that Memphis hip-hop keeps having to learn, or rather that keeps being demonstrated without anyone quite learning it, is that the music industry can create opportunities to exit the street life, but it cannot force anyone through the door. Mac Critter had the door. Lil Double O had the door. The door is still technically there for both of them. Whether either of them is able to walk through it at this point depends on factors that are mostly outside their control at this moment. The courts, the streets, the allegiances that have already been declared publicly and can't be taken back. What made the Mac Critter and Lil Double O story so compelling to begin with was the genuine sense that these two dudes could do something real together. The music they made in collaboration, Act Up, Laser Quest, Gravedigger, had energy that neither of them fully replicated separately afterward. And the Memphis rap scene benefits when it's